Let's do it. It's go time.
Hey, how's it going out there, guys? Welcome to the show. Got a great one lined up for you today, as usual. Episode 71, Ballbusters, the nature of science and the scientific method continued. We've been dropping anchor here for a while, and we're going to continue for a while longer. As usual, if you'd like to support this channel, there are PayPal and Patreon links in the info box below. Like we got a passel of Ballbusters in the chat currently. We'll start off with the distinguished Nathan Oakley. How's it going out there, sir?
Very well. I'm immediately going to hand straight over to Adam to rattle through the introductions quickly, because your introduction rudely interrupted a very on-topic, scientific-based conversation that we were having just before your intro went out.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Adam.
Good evening, everyone. Over to Arwen.
Jeez.
What? Me? Why? Hello.
Just say hello and pass the
Hi,
book.
guys.
Over to Brian.
Well, special introduction, because although I didn't consciously realise this, Brian wasn't actually officially a ballbuster until today. So welcome as a ballbuster, Brian. Not that I realised you weren't, my friend. I'm really sorry to be introducing you as a ballbuster for the first time, given that I automatically assumed you were anyway.
Hey, thanks, Nathan. Thanks, QE, for adding me. Thanks for having me as part of the team. The only disappointment I have is that Ranty is not here anymore.
It's very disappointing. Also, that you joined as an official ballbuster today, and yet you joined the server and were instantly server muted and couldn't say a word unless one of us gave you permission to speak, which seems a bit derogatory given your status now. But there we go. That's how things are. We'll have to speak to a mod.
No, I've checked why. I've checked why, and it's because he's not changed his logo over here.
Hey,
I'll have to do it.
Ah, you missed one, Brian.
Because he's
follow
Irish.
this one.
I fixed it.
Oh, you a tenor.
I fixed it. So Brian, he'll be unmuted when he comes in from now on.
Thank you, Kiwi.
You're welcome. Okay.
Spectacular service. Anybody else that we're not mentioning as a ballbuster that should be mentioned as a ballbuster? So I know.
Negative.
We're not going to say hello to Neil.
Neil's not a ball buster just yet.
That's it. I'm out of here.
I knew that was the case officially. I'm our boss today, Neil.
I'm the biggest ball buster he has got.
Damn right.
That's true. Before the intro rolled, Adam and I were talking about one of my frustrations with a lot of YouTubers, one of which in specific terms talks about microphone measurements and graphs for them. And just every so often, I'll preface this by saying 99% of what he says I actually agree with, in terms of his credence that he lends to microphones and headphones and various other things with their frequency response graphs presented on screen. You're like, yeah, that's very useful data to me. I know what it means, and so does he, and he stresses the importance. But just every so often, he'll talk about validating a hypothesis, or his experiment, or his science, and it just really annoys me. And Adam was then following that up with talking about medicine and certain aspects of it. But following what you were saying, Adam, just to carry on that conversation, if Kiwi's okay with that, let's just check.
No, we're good.
To carry on this.
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead.
You said, well, in medicine, you know, you're doing medicine. It's biology. It's not necessarily classified as science. It's not got experiment and stuff. But what I was going to reply to that just before the introduction rudely interrupted us, was to say, why would you undermine validity of your research by falsely ascribing it as science? So then some tosser like me can come along and go, ha, pseudoscience then. You know, you're essentially undermining your own work if you do that, in my opinion. Would you agree?
I think ultimately, when critical appraisal is applied, yes, because it's going to put you in a point where people can shout pseudoscience. That's not. You know what I mean? And that's where you have the issues with your sound engineer. The point I was kind of making, you don't need to, do you? There's plenty of validity in what you're describing without having to say that's proven as science. Doesn't necessarily, everything doesn't have to be underpinned to have validity. And that's kind of what I wanted to show last night. There was plenty of bits in there that you could dig bits of science out. But the whole thing was medicine we were talking about, and nutrition. So, and you don't, as you say, what you don't have to do is sully it, really, by trying to paint it as something that it's not. Because, like I said, then when you do get to critical appraisal, that's when good work you've presented, the valid work, can be poo-pooed. Exactly as you say.
Obviously, it's done to lend credence to things that aren't necessarily valid but want to be perceived as valid. Obviously, we're talking in a heliocentric context when we preface what we say in this regard, or when I say what I'm about to say, which is I'd love to be able to talk about the heliocentric model with some fondness, similar fondness that I used to hold for it. And what I mean by that is, if it was described as a philosophy and used and described as a tool for describing conceptualization about the sky to help you describe its movements, and then the failings of it wouldn't really matter anymore. It's just a philosophy and a way of describing with a model the movement of the lights in the sky. And you don't need to offer any apologies, you don't need to offer up gravity, you don't need to do any of those things to explain the non-existent phenomena that they're ascribing to a heliocentric model anymore. Just an interesting philosophy, interesting way of looking at things. And in many ways, I've got a lot of admiration for the heliocentric model. In terms of its complexity and beauty, you think, well, that's quite cool. The reason why a lot of people think heliocentrism or space is cool, because it is. I'm not going to deny it. It doesn't mean we're living on a ball. It doesn't mean the sky is a vacuum. But make people think they are, the word science gets used, the word hypothesis, the word theory, experimentation, they all get used. And it's just done to lend credence, like it was for microphone measurements. If you can make it seem like you've got a bit of science, people will pay a bit more attention because it's a magic word. oh, well, if you say that word, then everything you must be saying is validated, possibly even empirical. That's what you've been taught when you were a kid. It suddenly makes party brain light up that says, pay more attention to this. This is definitely true. Because that's what you've been told science is. And I offer you empiricism. When someone says, well, I'm testing my hypothesis, I've got a bit of scientific evidence from my measurements. Oh, wow, well, that's impressive. No, it's nonsense. It's pseudoscience, and there was no need to do it in the first place. Present the measurements and say, look, this is why it's good. It's more flat, it's less flat, it's got a greater peak, it's got a lesser peak. This will mean that. It will mean it sounds like this. And qualify what you describe in terms of a frequency response. Nothing wrong with that. Excellent work, in fact. I appreciate it. I'm a subscriber of this particular dude who won't get a mention in terms of his channel name, which keeps changing. But there we go. Don't undermine your own mathematics if they're valid. Nothing wrong with that. Present them as is, and people will just, decide whether or not they need to reify them into existence if they choose to. Maybe Scientology will be the last remnants of heliocentrism if it fades into obscurity over the next 50 years. Who knows? I've waffled on long enough.
Well, I think somebody who's claiming science for something like that, they're claiming science out of ignorance. So what happens is, if somebody like you approaches them and is very critical, then they end up looking like they're being dishonest. But their dishonesty only came out of, their perceived dishonesty only came out of ignorance.
Training. The amount of times people, like my example with the Michelin tyres, it's not necessarily Michelin, I change each time so I don't get sued. But ultimately, when you've got a tyre manufacturer saying that they've done scientific testing to get the grip at the highest level, there might even be some phenomena that they figured out the cause of to, I don't know what, in terms of tyres. It's so difficult to actually ascribe something that's actually scientific to it. I mean, there might be. I very much doubt it. The claim is, better grip, and science is behind it when they measure and test. You're like, no, you've just tested and measured. That's maths. Nothing wrong with that. Show us all the graphs and data for all the testing that you did. Just don't use the word testing in a scientific context, because testing in science is a hypothesis test. It's an experiment. And you haven't done any experiments. There's no phenomena. There's nothing naturally occurring with tyres. You'll hear the word science, and it trains someone like this guy I'm describing with his frequency response graphs. Just see it as the magic trick it is. I heard that word when describing tyres or when describing shampoo. Now comes the science part. They go, oh, that worked a treat. I'll use that. I've been trained to do it by all the pretender clowns out there that like using that magic word also. We've got a load of them on the flat earth side. I hear it all the time.
Yes, we do.
Before.
On.
With regards to Jennifer Aniston and her hair, that again, it's a bit like nutrition. That's a biological description. There might be science bits in it, that just like the tyres. The tyres are a bit different. There's technology there, isn't there? There's product design in there. You might be able to tease a bit of frictional science, something that you could within that. But the reality is that within all of this, they're advertisers, and we all know advertisers lie. So why would they lie? Well, what's their lie? Their lie is they're claiming it as science. Why? Because science adds, in the real world, if something is scientifically proven, it does add validity. So that's why an advertiser would want to claim that validity. Don't necessarily blame, change the name, Hancock, or misrepresenting it. You know what I mean? It is, to me, the point is it's advertising. And why would an advertiser use that word? Because it implies superiority of knowledge.
Indeed. And it's the same exact principle when it comes to people doing it on YouTube. What are they advertising? What are they selling? Well, themselves, their own credibility in terms of their validity when it comes to their statements about what they're talking about. Doesn't matter if they're selling that product, selling themselves. They want more credence, they want more clout, therefore throw in a science word here and there, and people will go, oh, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. I left a comment for him recently. I was like, science? No, it isn't. What's next? You're going to put on a white coat? Give yourself a bit more validity. Didn't offer any useful words of don't undermine yourself. Your measurements are good enough. But Brian, you were trying to get a word in, but if mic issues.
No, no, I've just given way to Kiwi, yourself, and Adam. No, all I was going to say is I kind of can't really attack those kind of people too much because up to 5 years ago, before I started listening to Quantum Eraser, especially his first time on your channel, Nathan, there's a lot of things I just would have accepted as being science myself, as we all would have. Just there's a lot of claims that I went, oh, that must be science, and that's why so many flat earthers were anti-science. And I was one of those because we didn't know the difference between pseudoscience and actual science.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a massive turning point around about 2016 where we realised the bait and switch that was the lie of science. And right up until QE's prevalence on this scene, we had people telling us that the whole body of science proved that we were on a sphere. And we've got quote after quote after quote. QE comes along. Do you hear that anymore? No. What do you hear now? Oh, well, you hear that science doesn't prove anything. From the anti-flat earth side of this argument, I kid you not, that is what they now tell us. Like, what its only purpose is to prove things. It's designed with a null so that it is empirical and can only give you a positive result at the end, one way or the other. So something's going to get proven at the end of this process. That's for damn sure. That's all it does. What's that you say? Anti-flat earther who's just had his pseudoscience pointed out to him? Science doesn't prove anything. Really? Why all the years of telling us that the whole body of science proves you're on a sphere then? Amazing. You're wrong, because science definitely proves things. It just didn't prove your sphere for you.
They need to claim the open door policy, don't they? They need to claim science as being just a big open door that can be walked through at any point. That way because for what they want to make true or want people to believe or what they believe, they need that. They can't have anything that's empirical because empirical means that you can't change it. And if it doesn't fit with their model, then they can't change it if they stick with something that's empirical.
Yeah, but how can they scientifically prove a globe? They can't.
Yeah, that's the point, though.
It's an invalid question scientifically, isn't it? It's not a cause and effect relationship. They're asserting a model.
Exactly. So they were foolish to state that in the early days, the whole body of science. That was foolish.
So, question for you, Neil, right? Do you think then that certain anti-flat earthers now, that if they were to claim science does prove things, should they get a ban from Jen Panda's server for a week?
Yep.
Before let's not go into what Tommy told us about the cult-like behavior coming from rival servers. Let's just put it that way and get back on track. So we're talking about the empiricism that's being hijacked in a lot of instances by people on the heliocentric side of the argument. That's the mainstream, not the anti-flat earthers, who will assert that they are science. Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicists in general. They're going to assert that they've got science when they talk about the world as a sphere and a sky vacuum, and they don't. So what is it that makes science science? Well, the empiricism comes from the hypothesis. So any experiment is going to be a hypothesis test, and a hypothesis has a null. So in the hypothesis, you've got two outcomes, a positive one and a non-positive or null, the antithesis of your prediction. So if A, then B is your prediction. If I vary this thing I think is the cause, then I will cause the effect I am studying. That's if A, then B. B is the effect you're studying in nature. A is the thing you will vary. The null is the antithesis of that. That is if A, not B. I vary this thing I think will cause the natural phenomena I am studying, and it doesn't cause it. Now, one or other, by the law of mutual exclusivity, you can't have both if A and B, and if A, not B. You can't cause A and not cause you can't have A causing B and not causing B at the same time. It cannot happen. So at the end of the process, one or other of those two things in the hypothesis, that would be alternative and null, if A then B or if A not B, will be proven. You can't have both. You can either have a null result, that's a zero difference result, nothing happens, you don't cause the phenomena, or you cause the phenomena. One or other is all that can happen. So therefore, at the end of the process, one will get a tick next to it, the other will be discounted. It doesn't, in this example at least, as I describe it, matter which gets a tick next to it, because one or other will get a tick. A tick, what's that? Well, proven. Proven, A does not cause B. Proven, A causes B. One or other's getting a tick. What does that mean in real terms? Well, back to the original point of this. It's empiricism. That's the nature of empiricism. In fact, I think if you look up the definition, it says to test by experiment. But nevertheless, the point is that at the end of the process, something's getting proven. So that's powerful if you want to convince somebody with the terminology that goes along with that process, which you've been taught at a very early age, will be proving things empirically. You know, at a base level, somewhere in your brain, you know that it's proving things. You've been taught it. We all know. That's why the magic trick works. When they say science says, suddenly reify science into the lips of a man, giving you a little story. You go, so a man says empiricism with his little story then. That's what your brain will tell you. It'll have a little release of dopamine and you'll be all happy that you understand something now. Even though it's a story that had no experimental validity and didn't have a null and didn't have an alternative and probably didn't have a phenomenon to study in the first place. There we go. Rant over.
Shout out to Tony Wickham. He says, when are constructor going to start bending railway lines downwards to conform with the sphere of life? Never.
There's no need to. There's no drop. What are we actually covering today? I know it's part D of the scientific process, but we only got halfway through the last presentation and you haven't actually subtitled or undertitled or whatever you call it. Subtitled, is that the right word? Categorized it in the title.
Yeah, I usually do that in the description. I didn't do that same thing for these guys for some reason. But what we're going to, we stopped at scientific hypothesis, you know, what it is, and right at the supposition point, and I wanted to start back over there again. So we'll go over hypothesis, little bit about what is a hypothesis, the parts of the hypothesis, what's not a hypothesis that goes by a hypothesis, different types of variables, math variables. We're going to talk about independent variables, and we're going to put them all together into what is an alternative. We'll talk about a null too. What is an alternative? What is a null? What is an experiment? And what differentiates the three?
Oh, superb. Short of repeating my last statements, I can't really lead into the presentation with anything other than I've already said.
I know.
Which is unfortunate.
I know. That's why I shut up.
I just want to congratulate Nathan on a fantastic way of summarizing E. It was almost clairvoyant, Nathan.
I was just thinking that, considering I was asking the pre-show, what's the show on? Literally, I asked what the show was on. Clairvoyant, man.
It was such a brilliant looking at. Well done.
You think we ought to get into it since you prefaced it so well?
I think so. I'm not going to top that. Let's put it that way.
Let's get the right screen on. That would probably be good. Let's roll on into it then. We stopped here, like I said the last time, right at supposition, because I wanted to point out a really subtle difference between a supposition and a presupposition, because these terms are thrown around like laundry, right? And I don't think people know what they exactly mean, obviously, because I always hear you presuppose a cause. No. A supposition and presupposition are two drastically different things, as it turns out. So a scientific hypothesis is a supposition. A supposition, on the other hand, has a connotation that the idea or theory is testable and provable. You see, it's tentative. It's provisional. That's what a supposition is. As opposed to a presupposition, something that you believe is true without having any proof. You see the subtle difference? So a presupposition is already assumed to be true beforehand. It's not provisional. You're not going to test it. It's just assumed to be true. It's very subtle, but very important to differentiate between these two terms, because words, they mean things. So I've been hearing a lot of presuppositions. I usually stop people. It depends on the conversation. If it's real heated and presupposition comes out of you, just let it go. Right? But if it's in a casual conversation, I'll go ahead and stop and point out the differences between two, because I think they're very important. So what is a supposition? Well, if you look up what a supposition is, guess what you're going to see? It's a hypothesis, because that's what it is. It's just tentative. It's provisional. This thing doesn't explain anything. It's tentative. That's the most important thing you can get out of this. Hypothesis is tentative. A valid scientific hypothesis establishes, again, a tentative possible supposed cause and effect relationship, which will either be confirmed or invalidated by the experiment. The cause and effect relationship is supposed. This is really important too, because some people get this confused. I can't believe it. The cause and effect relationship is supposed. However, the independent variable's existence isn't supposed. For example, alternative hypothesis, and I used this for years, given otherwise healthy type 1 diabetes patients, the lack of insulin will lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. See, the independent variable, the cause here, is insulin or the lack of, and the dependent variable, the effective prediction, diabetic ketoacidosis. I'm not supposing or assuming in advance the existence of insulin, right? It most certainly exists. The supposition is connected to its effects. Again, something that's very subtle, but really, really important when you get down to what an independent variable is. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes, more specifically. The clueless pretender clowns are so ignorant and desperate because their incoherent goose is cooked. They think because they see the word presumed, that is, independent variable is the presumed cause, right? See that word right there? Then that greases the skids and it allows them to float presumptions or assumptions, sphere Earth, spinning Earth, etc. It goes on and on as independent variables. You can't do that, right? The independent variable's effect is presumed, right? It's getting ready to be tested. It's a supposition. See experiment, not the independent variable, the cause itself. Like I said before, we already know insulin exists. We're not developing a hypothesis to figure out if it exists or not, right? Next block of instruction, how to say the on Tuesdays. Like I said, it's subtle. You got to think about it. Clear your head for a second and then differentiate the two terms. It's very easy, but very important. May sound pedantic, but it's not. So some hypothesis examples, I've had these for years too. No sense of changing them, right? Heat will cause water to boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius at 1 atmosphere pressure, 14.7 psi. This sends a lot of baltards into a tizzy, boy. They just lose their minds over this. They're just not seeing how easy. This is a viable scientific hypothesis, point blank. It's got the independent variable, right? What is it? Heat. Simple. The dependent variable? Boil. Water boiling in the temperature. Now, in this specific case, there is a control variable in the hypothesis. Sometimes you'll have caveats. And the reason why it is for this, boiling point elevation, freezing point depression, anything with gases. See, because they're always connected, volume, pressure, and temperature. That's the only special case that you'll see that in a hypothesis, to have the control variable. You don't really have to have it. It's presumed, but I put it in there for completeness. But it's just something to think about. Maybe we could talk about that one caveat. It's not a big deal. The second one, and we already went over this, given otherwise healthy type 1 diabetes patients, the lack of insulin will lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. That's a viable scientific hypothesis. There's no levels or degrees here. It's either viable or it's not. It's either black or white, 1 or 0, right? One's not better than another. Wow, that's a really good hypothesis. It's better than this one. No degrees, no levels. Number 3, if the which path information is known or can be known, we will observe wave function collapse. That is no interference. matter existing. That is a viable scientific hypothesis, easily tested. If vitamin C intake is crucial to collagen integrity, that's in humans, then eliminating vitamin C intake will cause scurvy. That is a viable scientific hypothesis. You can pull the independent variables and the dependent variables out. That's what makes up a scientific hypothesis. What is not a scientific hypothesis? This guy right here. You'll hear it every now and again. It's called a complex hypothesis. This examines the relationship between two or more independent variables and two or more dependent variables. Complex hypotheses are not scientific hypotheses. You ain't getting an experiment out of this, right? You're going to get correlations out of this. You're not going to get a hammer down cause and effect relationship. Like I said right here, Row, Shaggy. Remember, this says two or more independent variables. Well, if you go to the University of Texas, there can only be one independent variable and one dependent variable in an experiment. That tells you right away that this guy right here is not a viable scientific hypothesis because you can't test it. You can test it, but you're not going to get an ironclad cause, right? It's all going to be correlation. So that's why. And the University of Texas said it straight. I had some dealings with these guys, by the way, so I like pointing this out. This complex hypothesis, like I said before, nonsense, is employed in epidemiological studies. They're correlative. And remember, correlation does not equal causation. Very important statement right there. Science and the scientific method deals exclusively with cause and effect relationships. Causation, period. Not this. Not this. Whenever you hear statistical hypothesis, you know there's a rooster in the hen house, right? Because that's all correlation. So be careful out there. If you remember correlation doesn't equal causation, then you're good to go. From Cornell.edu, epidemiological studies can never prove causation. So if they can't prove causation and scientific method and scientific experiment is all about causation, then this isn't science. You guys follow that? Hopefully. Very easy. Epidemiological studies can never prove causation. That is, it cannot prove that a specific risk factor actually causes the disease being studied. Epidemiological evidence can only show that the risk factor is associated, correlated, with a higher incidence of disease in the population exposed to that risk factor. The higher the correlation, the more certain the association, but it cannot prove causation. And if it cannot prove causation, then it's not natural science. Period. End of story. Math variables. I wanted to throw this in here because every now and again, used to hear it much more back in the day, but not so much anymore. I think I stamped this one out pretty quick. But every once in a while, you'll get a numpty come in and say, "Oh, you deny all of math, and that's where the variables actually came from." No. From Anne-Marie Helmstein, PhD, Biomedical Sciences, a variable is any factor that can be changed or controlled. In math, a variable is a quantity that can assume any value from a set of values. A scientific variable is a little more complicated. You see the juxtaposition. Plus, there are different types of scientific variables. Scientific variables are associated with the scientific method. Duh. Variables are things that are controlled and measured as part of the scientific experiment. Period. End of story. So it juxtaposes them and differentiates them. That's pretty much all there is right here. A variable, I like this one. A variable is a quantity that can assume any value. Well, independent variables cannot assume any value. Many don't have values at all. So it's non sequitur, essentially, to compare the two. Let's stop there. Questions, comments?
Yeah, can you tip your mic slightly off axis? Every P is putting a plosive in your mic.
I'll give you a plosive.
Yeah, when you're talking about proof, PhDs, it's a big problem. Anyway,
yeah.
I know you'll get to this later in the discussion, so don't stop me, even though you're I'm covering something in advance. But you kept saying that can be easily tested. Yeah, the whole point of this is that it's going to go on to be tested. When you're talking about suppositions and presuppositions, well, your presupposition doesn't require any testing because it's already taken to be true.
Yep.
And I wanted to expand on one of your examples. I didn't know if you get to it, but you did, so that's good, which is scurvy. So in terms of a couple of different examples when it comes to presuppositions and suppositions, and I'm going to describe these in the light that we're not going to be doing any testing to make my actual point at the end, which is to say that you could suppose seawater causes scurvy. And given that in my example, we're not going to go forward to test, we'll just say, well, the people who aren't exposed to seawater don't get scurvy, and therefore I'm correct. Right? Further to that, just to make it in the realms of things that aren't real, you could have a presupposition. Bearing in mind my supposition of seawater's become a presupposition now because we're not going to test it. But supposition that as soon as you leave land, you enter the twilight zone. And that realm is what gives human beings scurvy. Again, we're not going to test it, but we're just going to take that as read. Now, my point in describing all this is because it's to strap on the point that when you're developing a hypothesis, this is something that is going to be tested. It is not to be taken as the explanation. Again, this is where I'm stealing QE's thunder because he's going to get to the null hypothesis later. But you have to actually test the thing that you suppose to see if it actually causes the effect that you're studying. In other words, you can't take the hypothesis to be an explanation. Suppositional idea of what might cause something is not an explanation. Often people will ascribe an explanation with the word hypothesis, although it hasn't been tested, not mention it, and then just offer it up as though it's an explanation that is actually valid. It hasn't been tested, might not even be validatable, might not even have a phenomenon, might just be a just so story. But you offer the word up, hypothesis, and again, because it's got some of the magic of science attached to it, people don't recognise that it's a supposition yet to be tested. The point is, hypothesis, not an explanation. At this stage, just a supposition yet to be tested.
Very well articulated.
Not much to disagree with, John. The only thing I feel the need to stick on is the end bit, mass variables, scientific variables, and I'm not going to ramble enough time for you to eat a banana. With some Atheism. Genuinely, if somebody's going to try and conflate those two in debate with you, for me, I'd kind of call it there and call them out to show that it's a clear demonstration that they don't understand the definition of either. To try and conflate those things means you ain't got a clue what you're doing. Very distinctly different things. I think the best way is, a mathematical variable can be anything, can't it? And achieve any numerical value. It's not constrained by reality. It's constrained by the other things in the formula. That's its only constraint. It's got no bearing on reality.
All I'd say about it is scientific method in general is an exercise in logic. And so if you either won't accept it or can't understand it, to not accept it means you're not accepting logic. And if you can't understand it, it means that you don't understand logic. Because it couldn't be any simpler. To get the outcome you're looking for, how else would you go about it but with that strict formula? Finished.
To add to that, Brian, go back actually, John, the other bit I liked is when you list those different levels of complexity of hypothesis, and the statement none's better than the other, and that's really important in terms of their scientific validity. They might yield more knowledge to you, some of them, but in terms of their scientific validity, each one is as valid as the other.
Each one what? Are you talking about null versus alternative?
No, the list of there's about 5 John gives, isn't there? They're from vitamin C to some of the others. So all of them are correct in their adherence and application of being able to be proved with a valid hypothesis and supported with experiment. All of them. Some of them are more complex than others. Some of them yield more knowledge, I suppose, to the real world than others. But that's kind of irrelevant in terms of their validity as a scientific experiment. Each one is as valid as the other and has as much scientific strength as the other. It's not better because it supposedly tells you a little bit more about reality from a scientific method point of view. Each one is as valid as the next. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's empirical, and to speak to Brian's point, it's passed through the logic gate and come out on the other side. Well, that's it. That's all it needs to do to qualify as being experimentally valid. And even if we were talking about things that hadn't actually been validated, i.e. the alternative wasn't filled in the experiment stage, I mean, maybe you could throw one in the next presentation when it comes in a year's time, but, have something that's actually validated the null, the examples, because we're saying, well, no matter which way it gets diced up at the end of the process, you're going to be validating something. So, an example where something got varied and some bright spark said, I think this causes that. All right, let's experiment then. So they vary this, it doesn't cause that. Oh, well, what do you know? That A, presumed cause, did not cause B. Effect. Phenomena being studied. Oh, we learned something. A didn't cause B. Tick. Something's been proven.
Shout out to Tony Wickham again. Thank you, sir. Seen the track of the apparent ISS across the moon, and it was twice the width of the moon. The trajectory was a straight line and not a curved path. Appreciate it, Tony.
QA.
What's the ISS?
Yep.
What's the ISS?
What's the ISS?
Not the stage show on TV with men on high wire. That's just a stage. The thing that traversed the moon, what is it?
I have no idea. I know what it's not.
I know it's not too. It's not a tin can in a sky vacuum. That goes without saying. Maybe it doesn't because we're on a public show and we have an audience and we should be very much saying that. So let's say exactly that. The ISS is not a tin can in a sky vacuum with men hanging around on wires inside a set. That is definitely not what it is. But it is still another anomaly. It's another phenomena, if you will. And I'd like to know what it is. I don't. People claim to describe it as X, Y, and Z, and I don't believe a word of it because their descriptions also include it being in a sky vacuum and having men inside tin cans that are actually clearly on high wire. So, but I'd still like to know what it is.
Go ahead, Adam.
I don't have an answer to Nathan's question. I was talking about the hypotheses, and I'm talking about the same scientific merit, and I was gonna juxtapose 2 and 4. Have you given 4 an upgrade? I was going to say there's a bit more detail in 2 when we talk about type 1 and diabetic ketoacidosis. There's more detail in there, yet it's just as valid a hypothesis and experiment that leads to validation. But you've put, because did it not just used to say if vitamin C leads to scurvy, but you've upgraded it to intake is crucial to collagen integrity.
No, it's always been that way.
Have I always missed that?
Always been that way.
Oh, there you go then.
Yep. I haven't changed. No, this has been the same as it was from the beginning. If you go back, I think I started with this on Cathexis. I think I did a presentation on Cathexis channel. I think it was the same 4, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back. Right. I'm not going to go back and look. I'm thinking they were the same.
That is correct. It was done on Cathexis channel. I remember reading it and having to wrap my head around it at the time because it was the lack thereof, which seemed weird in terms of the phrasing. So I just paid that little bit more attention to it. But yeah, it's always been that way.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to shout Mandela then. That's all I can do. The point still being, all of those, I think you made it, John. in the presentation, which is why I just wanted to reiterate that they're all as valid as each other. Some of them sound tougher and harder and would be harder to do at your home or yourself to do, but they're all, from a scientific point of view, from the empiricism, as long as you set the experiment correctly to control all these things, it does do what it says on the tin. They're all as valid as each other. You can stick the label of science on it. There's nothing wrong with that. As crap as an experiment can be sometimes, you can actually stick the label of science on it if set up correctly.
Yes, sir.
Gonna go and boil my kettle. What are you saying about crap experiments?
Yeah, well, you know what? Do you get me? As long as it's done right, then that's the important thing. It doesn't have to be profound science. Its strength doesn't come from the statement it makes to reality. Its strength comes from the setup of the hypothesis, the empirical nature of it, and the validity it gives, the rigidity of controlling things so that you have the certainty to make the statement. That's the strength. The thing you're testing doesn't have to be of any profound nature. In fact, sometimes simple things demonstrate the simplicity of the scientific method. It's not a complicated thing in of itself. It can do complicated things, and experiments can be complicated. In of itself, it is very simple.
I've been sitting on this for 3 minutes. Sorry. I'm really sorry, Brian. I've just got to get this out because I'll forget about it otherwise. Just spotted something with that guy super chatting about the ISS, and it is on topic before you jump down my neck. So it does work both ways. This might be a new magic trick that I've just spotted. So I just moments earlier said, well, correct me if I'm wrong, dependent variable, in quotes, ISS, based on the fact that you've just said you don't know what it is, and we know certain what it isn't, would I be justified in saying DV ISS? First of all,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, possibly, yes.
Right. So we've got a slight reversal of the old normal switcheroo and use of the magic trick. So technically, not even technically, we've got an observed phenomena. We could try and figure out the cause of that with science, right? We could propose a hypothesis, establish the cause of the ISS, the phenomena that is the ISS.
What's the independent variable?
That doesn't matter. I'm just saying that this is a... I'm saying that you've got a natural... I'm not proposing hypotheses. I'm just saying that the start of that process is observe a natural phenomena. You can't disagree with that. I'm saying...
I can.
I can.
You are presupposing it's natural. If it's a rocket ship that goes over, it's man-made.
I know you're stealing my point. No, that's my point.
Sorry.
What I'm saying is they've already done that for you. They're telling you it's a man-made object. They're telling you it's not a phenomena. It's a man-made thing in orbit that we're ascribing to it. Presupposition. I'm saying they've already made that step for you. Now, isn't that interesting, given that I'm saying, well, what's that? What is that light in the sky? What is the cause of it? Might be a question we might want to ask if it wasn't already decided for us that it's a man-made device. I'm just pointing out something that's just occurred to me. I just thought it was interesting, and I'd share it with you.
Yeah, you can't. They're telling you it's a man-made device, but you don't know that for certain. Is that what you're saying, Nathan?
Exactly. If it's already predetermined to be something that man has put up there, don't concern yourself with what it is or how it got there or what it's doing, because you already know. If you suddenly go, well, I know it's not that. I know it's not orbiting. I know it's not in a sky vacuum. I know it hasn't got any men inside it. And the reason I know is because what they show us is men in high wire, and the place they say the men in high wire are is a second law of thermodynamics violation. And the trajectory that they're taking is in a presuppositional orbital path that doesn't exist. So everything they're telling us about it is a lie, including that it's been made and put up there. That's a fact. I know that for a fact. That leaves me with, what is it? I don't know. I'd be asking a lot more questions about it if I was Joe Normal, if it wasn't the case that it had already been predetermined that you don't need to concern yourself because we made it and put it up there. Did they? I know they didn't. What the hell is it? Well, we might be studying it if it wasn't already predetermined to be man-made. That's it.
That was my point. How do we know that it wasn't? It's not previously been noted. We have to presuppose. Now, I'm happy to presuppose that it's not doing it in a space vacuum. It's not it's not doing it in the place they claim. I can't allow myself to presuppose that they haven't put it there, or vice versa. Yeah, that still has to be a possibility that they've created that light in the sky. That still is yet to be disproven. Now, the fact that I can clearly prove it's not in space, in an orbit, etc., I'm happy with that. But the fact that I can't prove that the actual thing that I see is man-made, I certainly can't prove it's natural, because it's not in an almanac, as far as I'm aware.
Oh, my bad. Obviously, being in an almanac defines neutrality, or whatever the word is.
No, what I mean, there's no prehistory to it. So it, unless I'm mistaken, it's got no prehistory other than association with that, no pre-noticing. So whatever they're doing, I'm still happy it's man-made, but I can't presuppose they haven't done it, if you see what I mean. I can presuppose it's not in the place they claim.
I can't rule it out either. I'm not going to discount that it could be man-made. I'm saying that the description and count of it being man-made is bunk. Currently, you might, further to that prove that no, it is actually something else that is man-made. The current rhetoric is just lies. Does that mean that I'm not going to rule it out as man-made? Okay, well, I'll buy that too. It doesn't mean that I know what it is, or that it is definitely man-made when it's just a light in the sky.
Well, if I had to hedge a guess at what it is, I would say that it's a balloon that has been sent up to meet one of the polar jet streams. Something like that. But that would be a guess.
Maybe.
Have you ever seen the Eon adverts and stuff where sorry, no.
I was just going to say there's been several other things that have been up there. You've got Skylab, and you've, what's the other one? I forget its name. But you've got various different incarnations of something with a very similar load of properties to it. Like, okay, so they keep bunging something up and claiming they keep repeatedly claiming that the thing in the sky is man-made, and as the optics improve to look at the thing, it seems to advance. Like, okay. Could be people getting a better look at this thing and then them needing to advance what it's actually claimed to be, so they ditch the last incarnation of it and then reintroduce another. Now, I've seen various different Masonic hats that have got this symbol on it that looks very similar to the ISS in terms of this sort of double cross that they have. Like, just interesting in terms of, when you say there's no history of it, if it's an anomaly that's unaccountable in the heliocentric model, wouldn't you expunge it and then come up with an excuse later on? It could be the whole reason for the necessity for the space program to account for this light in the sky that doesn't jive with the model in any way, shape, or form. So they have to ascribe a new orbital value at a close range in the heliocentric model. Well, that would mean that we've got to stick it up there. So we'll just keep repeatedly sticking things up there and saying we put it up there. And no one will wonder why you've got something out in the sky that seems to be just flown past at a totally different rate. People would definitely concern themselves with if it didn't know an answer that we've already got pre-packaged for them.
I agree with that, which is why I backtracked a little bit earlier. You can't rule that out, can you? Just to get Brian's point, I said there was a TV series with the TV advert where they got these big things where they turn the sun on and off, which is one of these big artificial suns. Imagine something like that that's stuck on a balloon. Now, from a mass point of view, if it's on a balloon in a jet stream, it hasn't got to be going these fantastical speeds of an orbit. It's just got to track locally that angular change would equate to that. So the speeds reduce significantly. You can stick it in a jet stream. I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to be able to put something up there to create that illusion. And so, yeah, I'd support that point, right? It's perfectly fakeable, whatever it is. But yeah, I wouldn't also say you could disprove Nathan's point. It could be something that they hide. Something they used to claim they used to get seen in the sky, used to claim it as a alien spacecraft or something that used to get seen many years ago. So I suppose there's always been anomalies, as you allied to, that they may be using now. Yeah, you can't rule it out.
Well,
I'm really sorry, QE. Totally off topic. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
yeah, okay, Nathan. I'll keep it short. QE wants to probably get going again, but well, I always do the same thing. I think, right, what would I do? And for me, I'd partially fill a helium balloon that's shaped correctly. I'd partially fill it because I wouldn't need to do anything else. So that when it got up into higher, low pressure, higher altitudes, lower pressures, it would naturally fill out itself. And using a polar jet stream, it would move around in an azimuth, but it wouldn't change elevation, so it would look like a straight line, basically, I would say, from the ground, like we see. So that's it. But as I said, there's no way for me to prove that.
You mean you could, from the ground, look at it, observe it, and pretend that its movement was an orbit, basically?
Yeah, well, you could claim it's an orbit, but it would still move in a straight line because it's always seen to move in a straight line. You could claim it's an orbit, but because it would move in an azimuth if it's one of the jet streams, but it would probably hold its for the time that you see it or I see it, it would hold its elevation. You know what I mean? Because the jet streams go from the equator and they bring air towards the Arctic and Antarctic regions. If the Antarctic exists, I don't know, but
we're now presuming that the place they'd fake this for us is in the jet stream. There's, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're apologising and making up how clever they could be and why they might be that clever.
Exactly. We need to know what it is first. And like I say, the best way to draw your attention to look into something is just give a prepackaged explanation for what it is, and that's what we've currently got. So, if nothing else, I'm hoping to heighten the audience's attention in that regard. There might be things that you think have already got an explanation that just become awkward arguing points, like the ISS. But for me, at least, I'm way beyond that now. So it's just a curiosity. Like, okay, I don't have an explanation for that. So what is it? Well, there's no difference in asking what the sky is to asking what the ISS is when you know what it isn't. But let's get back on track with scientific methodology and the null.
Hey.
Go on, Owen. Go on. If you've got something to add on the ISS, QE hasn't piped up and shut us up so far, so feel free.
Well, I've got a very old, very extremely fringe Arwinian theory about this that I don't know when I first brought it up. It was during the Flat Earth Talk days, maybe even not that straightforward at the time. But I think there might be a chance that, the people in this world that are trying to manipulate things, that they figured out a way to actually kind of simulate the celestial holographic effect, as it were, that they could write in the sky. I kind of predicted that would happen in the holographic age. So I think there might be some just unbelievable power basically out there that nobody really knows what to do with it, really. And things happen and then just they make up stories, right? Half the world now is preoccupied with making up stories, trying to justify things, keep gatekeeping, trying to keep it all stable, keeping everything stable with all the crazy things that are happening. And sometimes really crazy things do happen, like inexplicable phenomena that are just like suddenly happen.
Not fake stuff like William Shatner going to space, right?
I thought you'd like that, Neil, because what Alwyn's technically suggesting is projection onto the firmament, which I think is actually conceptually a very clever idea if you're going to work within certain paradigms. Well, that's actually how you could fake it, isn't it?
Well,
Maybe,
if they
but-
manage to simulate the holographic effect of the light manifestation as we see it typically at the edge of vision, yeah, that would be genius to just project some light effect that would cause everybody to see it in a certain radius, right? It's simple but so impressive what you could do with that.
I'll try and get us back on track one more time by saying all you know about it is what you can describe as it being apparent. It is just the same as the other lights in the sky in that regard. Beyond that, again, it seems like the indoctrination runs deep because you're still trying to justify it in a man-made way. Like, what is it? What exactly is it when you describe it? It's just a light in the sky. All it is. But your attribution of holographic projections made by man produce that light, or man-made object in jet stream justify that light. Like, number one, why offer any justification? Yeah, I'm the one saying I'm fascinated and I'm encouraging the audience to question these things in that way. By the same token, it's like speculation is definitely geared in the way that you've been programmed. No offense, guys, but that is just the fact. But when you're just trying to justify it as a man-made thing, and all it is what it is apparently, and it's no different to any other light in the sky in terms of what it does other than its path. Totally lied. That wasn't getting us back on track. It was actually just getting my point in last.
You nearly made me make another. Yeah, okay, let's get back on track, because we're just engaging in what we used to do, which was enjoy science fiction, and all we're doing there is engaging. Quote William Shatner. Yeah, you're trying to make science out of what is science fiction, and presumption after presumption after presumption. But because we miss that, I think, psychologically, that little bit of fantasy where you could presume things and build a starship and do this, do that, do the other. Now we're doing it with balloons, but it's just feeding that bit of the brain, that bit of the imagination, that bit of the wonder that we still have there. Could we do this? Could we do? What is it?
Hold on, we're also doing it all together with the internet as the next level platform where things go faster, where decision making is technically comes with less weight. So you could go straight to the target, right? You could specialize really quickly on the internet. So because of the internet and what it's become, we do actually now have this chance to get a grasp on what's really going on and work it out together.
Oh, you've gone the other way. I was making apologetics for why you can let your mind wander off like that. Yeah, you're validating it that it might. I mean, it might lead somewhere, but realistically, you're pissing in the wind unless you can send something up there and physically test it. Other than that, it's just guesswork, mate. As much as it can be intelligent guesswork, it's just science fiction still.
Yes, but it's all about the patterns. How consistent? How could it fit? Right? And then test it.
One sec, Owen. I was just going to say, but the arrogance to say, well, if it's not man-made tin can with men on dangly strings, then it's going to be a man-made XYZ. So it's like, okay, I was trying to get it through that it might not be anything to do with us whatsoever. All the speculation is like, well, it could be a man making a giant projection unit. It could be a man putting a tin can into a jet stream. It's got to be us that's doing that. Like, has it? Whatever gives you that idea? Oh, the fact that they said that is a man that put that light in the sky up there makes us think that we've got to offer up an alternative that's definitely got to have man involved in doing that. Why? Precisely, pray tell.
It could have been in the almanacs, couldn't it?
I got a very quick rebuttal.
Owen. It could have been in the almanacs. They could have hidden it from us. Yeah. And it could be a foreboder of something. Yeah. I don't preclude any of that, because fundamentally, as I said, you can't go up there and test it. So you've got no way of being able to validate any supposition that you might have. As much as you might want to prove it, you think you can, we can't. That's the reality of where we stand.
I got 3 words. Jesuit telescope projectors.
No, fair enough. No, I get it. And the speculation is good. And I totally agree with you, Adam. You want to exercise that muscle. You just want to keep it, working because you miss it. There's a lot of stuff that just leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Sci-fi on TV, I just can't stomach it. You still have that desire to fantasize about those aspects of life that you don't have an explanation for. Back to the point I said a second ago, the arrogance has got to be us, right? Well, we're obviously doing something. We've obviously got something to do with it. No, just don't know what. But we're definitely involved. Anyway, right, QE, are you there? Save us all. Save the audience.
Yeah, I'm still here. Back to the scientific method.
I thought you were going to tell us what the ISS was.
No, I already did. I said I didn't know. I know what it's not, and that's good enough because falsification is independent of replacement.
Yeah.
Now, do I wonder what it is? Often in the past 5 years, and then I just went and cleaned the bathroom because there's no way I can know. I just know what it's not.
All we can do is null hypothesis the crap out of whatever they throw at us.
Yeah. You ready to move on? It was a good discussion. I think the ISS is pretty interesting discussion with everyone.
Well, I have a question for you, Kiwi. Have you ever seen the light phenomenon yourself?
I have not.
Like a camera or telescope?
I have not. Nope.
Right. Neither have I.
I have.
So it's one of these weird things.
I have, and so is my wife.
What do you mean you have?
In the ISS with my naked eye. They told us to go out and see it because they told the kids it was Santa. And my niece at the time, and me and my wife, and we went out, and they were like, there it is. And then it was gone.
How
That
did
is
it look in
real.
comparison?
It's like a light in the sky.
How did you see it? Did you see it with the naked eye, or did you look
Yes, with
through
the naked eye. But however,
Really?
that's what I was going to preface it with. I've seen plenty of detail. And I'll tell you something for nothing. You can get this from Red Rhetoric. If you want to see really good detailed shots of the ISS, go to Red Rhetoric channel. Check him out. Because he's got excellent shots of it. Now, I don't know what that shape is. And they say the shape is the same as the underwater testing facility shape that they've got with men also in green screen high wire lit on stage. So, we've got what they tell us it is. And it really does closely resemble, if you look at the blurry shots that people catch when they do get good shots, you can match it up with what they've built on the ground. Now, do I find that shocking? No, again, in my explanation, where you have to account for it in somehow, it's going to get more and more elaborate as you can get better detail, better resolution with better optics. Therefore, you have to progress the build that's up there. Hence, you have an evolution of these flying objects in orbit. That's just my opinion, but that is the fact. If you look at the detailed pictures, you can go, yeah, I can kind of vaguely see it as being that thing that they've got in the underwater tanks. It's a similar shape.
I never knew that. This changes everything.
Changes everything. What do you mean?
It's real. If you've seen it, that means it's real. That's it.
Seen a light in the sky, Neil. Seen a light in the sky. That doesn't mean anything.
Well, we are led to believe that all the lights we see are spheres, aren't we? We've always been led to believe that. But that's not entirely true, as we've found out in the past few years. So maybe there's one of them the shape of the ISS. Who knows?
I don't see this as the slightest bit shocking. It's like we've been massively deceived in terms of the nature of what the sky is, what the stars are, what the planets are. And they're nothing like what they've been described as in a heliocentric world. So, and yet another light different in the sky that wouldn't jive if it was just claimed to be a planet or something, and has to be described as a tin can in a sky vacuum orbiting. Like, so it's basically part of the heliocentric description, but when you wipe the slate clean, you've just got another light in the sky doing something different. Okay? That's all you've got. That's what you've got to go on.
I think it's a double bluff. I think it's all subterfuge to hide the fact that you've actually got Nick Fury up there in his Sky Battalion. That's all. So you think it's an ISS, but reality, the Avengers are there. Point being, it could be anything. It could be real. It could be a projection. It could be absolute nonsense. It could be something that should be there.
Recently watched Spider-Man: Homecoming. Is that what this is about?
That's an old one, isn't it? When he's got a sky battleship. Do you know what I mean? But it could be any of that fantasy stuff. But projections are just as much fantasy as saying it's Nick Fury's skyship. We've got no idea of validating any of our supposition. So until you've got and this is the point of to try and bring it back with regards to what it started about. If you're going to suppose something, it has to presuppose. You move on from the presupposition. To suppose something is to move forwards, to inquire. Yeah, and you can't suppose something if you haven't got the means to inquire. All you can do is presuppose.
Way to tie that back into the presentation. That was a good one, Adam.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. You get it all out? I'll take that as a yes. Independent variables. You want to put a bee in the ball-tard's bonnet. Just mention that. Independent variable. That's all it takes. Too funny. From Penn State, independent variable is what is varied during the experiment. It is what the investigator thinks will affect the dependent variable. Go to Colorado State. Independent manipulated variable. Variable changed by who? The scientist. That's interesting. What the investigator is testing. So, changed by the scientist. Let's get a couple more. From the University of North Carolina. In an experiment, the independent variable is the variable that is varied or manipulated. There we go again. By who? By who? The researcher. And the dependent variable is the response that is measured. An independent variable is the presumed cause. That's where it gets into trouble right here. You see this presumed cause? Whereas the dependent variable is the presumed effect. They even confuse is a supposed cause, it should read. Whereas the dependent variable is the supposed effect. The IV, they got this right. The IV is the antecedent, whereas the DV is the consequent. I guess I could forgive them because they're just using the term loosely. But I already corrected it up above. From the Institute of Physics, independent variable, the variable that is deliberately, new one, deliberately changed. By who? The experimenter. From the University of Southern California.edu, independent variable, the variable that is stable and unaffected by other variables you are trying to measure. It refers to the condition of the experiment that is systematically, there's intent, systematically manipulated by who? The investigator. How many times have you heard Baltard say, you don't have to manipulate the independent variable, you can just do it by itself? Not according to all these definitions. Wonder where, are they just making stuff up? We got Colorado State, we got the University of North Carolina, the Institute of Physics, the University of Southern California, right? I think they're just making stuff up. Not these guys, the Baltards, right? Because that's directly opposite of what's being said. Again, we have it as the presumed cause. Like I said, they're being a little bit loose. I'll forgive them. Remember, viable independent variables must satisfy 3 criterion. And I ran into a graduate student last night on Discord just for like 30 minutes. It was a belly laugher. But anyway, he kept on, at least because he ran into me in the past, and he remembered what I was talking about with the constituent parts of an experiment. But once we got to the independent variable, he was all over the part that it is manipulated. We didn't get into who was manipulating it, but he just couldn't get out of, and he's correct. I mean, it is manipulated, but that's only one criterion, right? To make it a valid independent variable. The most important part is this one. the cause, right? Go ahead and change this right now. Supposed cause. Right? This is the most important. That's the first question you have to ask yourself. If this is a viable independent variable, is it possible for it to be the cause of the natural phenomena or the effect I observed? If it's not, if it's non sequitur, I don't care what you can manipulate about it. Doesn't matter. It's not going to fit. Follow? Hope so. Number 2, the researcher himself or herself must be able to vary or manipulate it, and confirmed by the definitions we went over above. And number 3, the independent variable must demonstrably exist before you use it in an experiment. I would say that probably has to be pretty important. All 3 criteria must be satisfied, not just one. That goes back to the discussion I had with the gentleman last night. So height, depth, width, length, distances, and time are not viable independent variables. Now, you'll get this one. You can get many citations that say that time is an independent variable. Well, is that true? No. It's just a citation. Remember what I said about citations. Number 1, they're not the argument. Number 2, every single citation, I don't care who it's from, is a baseless assertion fallacy on its face, unless that person that stated it in the citation supported that statement. If he didn't and you cite it, then guess who that responsibility falls on? You. It's very important. A lot of people seem to forget that. Well, most people don't even know what citations are anyway, so I digress. So let's get back to this. So height, depth, width, length, distances, time are not viable independent variables. These things, remember what I said about an independent variable. The most important thing, it's your cause, right? Height, depth, width, length, distances, and time don't cause anything. Number 1, the submarine was crushed at a depth of 10,000 feet. Did depth cause the sub to implode, or was it pressure? Number 2, the gentleman was so obese he measured 1 meter wide. Did width cause obesity, or was it laziness combined with excessive caloric intake? Number 3, over the course of the night, the sun suddenly appeared above the horizon. Did time cause the sun to appear above the horizon? Does time cause the difference of scores between the first and third quarters? You see, that's how silly this is. So whenever I hear it, it points in the direction that they're not looking at this as a cause. Only that something exists. They got these two, right? It demonstrably exists, and they can vary and manipulate it. It satisfies these two, but it got to satisfy the most important, that guy. Because if it doesn't, it's non sequitur, belly laughingly so. On to Nathan's favorite. He's got a special affinity for null hypotheses. From California State University Northridge, to do a hypothesis test, an experiment, in other words, you will actually have 2 hypotheses, the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, which are stated in such a way that they are mutually exclusive. You can't have both hypotheses be true. The null hypothesis is the conclusion that is considered the default. You will accept this hypothesis if you fail to find sufficient support for the alternative hypothesis. Very easy to understand. Especially once you know what a null hypothesis is, right? What is a null? From sciencenote.org. Null hypothesis. It's just like how it sounds. If you know what null means, then you know what a null hypothesis is, essentially. Null hypothesis, the zero difference or no difference hypothesis, predicts that changing one variable, what's that? The independent variable, obviously, will have no effect on the variable being measured, dependent variable. No, you must have an independent variable in your alternative hypothesis to even consider having a null. You must have a null hypothesis. The alternative and null hypotheses, like I said above, are stated in such a way that they are mutually exclusive. That is, both can't be true. For example, observing natural phenomena, we use the diabetic hypothesis up above. Healthy type 1 diabetes patients suffer from diabetic ketoacidosis, apparently from the absence of adequate insulin on board. That's our natural phenomena that we observe. So the alternative hypothesis, given otherwise healthy type 1 diabetes patients, the lack of insulin will lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. So that's the key right there. So that's when you know it's an alternative hypothesis, right? The null, the mirror image of the alternative, is the null. Null hypothesis, given otherwise healthy type 1 diabetes patients, the lack of insulin will not, see the difference? Lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. One of these cases is true. And you're going to test it to make sure one is true. Right? One of these can only be true. These two can't be true at the same time. It's a paradox. So the dependent variable, or the effect of the prediction from the hypothesis above, is diabetic ketoacidosis. Right? That's the effect. Or dependent variable. The independent variable, or the cause, is insulin. And in this case, the lack of insulin. So this is prime time, man. Everything is viable here. You're ready to go. In conclusion, this is a good slide right here. In conclusion, it separates the alternative null and experiment and what are the parts. So alternative hypothesis is the independent variable, the cause, plus the dependent variable, the effect. That equals a prediction of cause and effect. That's all a hypothesis is, alternative. Right? The null is the independent variable. It's going to be the same thing, only it's going to caveat it. It's a prediction of not cause and effect, or no cause, because it's a null. And experiment, independent variable plus the dependent variable, and then you add controls or constants. That's a prediction of cause and effect. There's how each are differentiated. Okay, good. Gonna stop there. Let's stop there. I think that's a good place to stop. Questions, comments?
Just to follow on your last point about control variables, it's just a slightly confusing term. Or at least it confused me when I first heard it. You're like, control, okay. Variable. So varying then? Well, no. It can be varied. It's something that could change, but you're going to keep constant. Hence, control variable. So IV, independent variable, thing you presume to cause the effect. Dependent variable, thing you're actually studying. Control variables, things that will be held constant to not affect the test. That was the first thing. The other thing I was going to say, slightly off topic because it's just a side point really, just from debate. But you'll probably name the fallacy at the end. But you were talking about how when you use a citation and it's just a baseless assertion on its face value if it's not been supported, and at the point that you make that would be the person citing it makes that statement or quotes that statement, becomes your baseless assertion. There's also a flip side to that, or it's a double-edged sword really, which is to say that sometimes people will ascribe an argument to the person that's made it and say, oh, that's just a quantum eraser argument if you were talking about having scientific validity, for instance. Now, in that instance, it's certainly not quantum eraser's argument when you talk about the scientific method. It's just the scientific method is what it is, but it gets ascribed to him to demean the validity of the argument. But the point I was going to make was actually when you make an argument and you cite somebody that has supported their evidence, it becomes your argument. In other words, you've supported your argument with a citation that had support, therefore wasn't a baseless assertion on its face value. You can see it the other way, which is to say that you can take ownership of these arguments. If somebody listened to this show, picked up on a particular point that Quantum Eraser had made in the presentation, took that forward into debate and pummeled the living daylights out of their opponent with it, and that is their victory. It doesn't suddenly become Quantum Eraser's victory because he made the point and they utilised it. He just forged the tool, they picked it up and swung it and took their opponent's head off with it. It's them that swung the sword. You know, it's their argument. So it works both ways. Yes, you can cite some garbage and have it pointed out that becomes your argument, but ultimately you can take a very good argument and put it across, and it also becomes your argument at that point. Doesn't mean you can blame the person if it doesn't win because you don't understand the argument, just to get that in as well. Just an aside point, not necessarily on scientific topic, but there we go. I summarised everything to do with that particular section in the just by chance, by clairvoyance in the summary before we started the presentation. But I'll hand over to Adam or whoever. Go ahead.
Yeah, cheers, bro. The bit that resonated to me in this bit really was time, because anybody that's got a basic understanding of doing experiments, you're always plotting t on that x-axis. Okay, and so you think, well, what are you on about? It's good to show. The importance of t, and when we do these things, is with the concept of time. Okay, we do plot these things, and what it shows us fundamentally is a rate of change. What it doesn't ascribe is a cause for change. All when you plot stuff with t, shows you how fast it's changing. That's all. I like that point. I'm done.
Yeah, perfect. It's inclusive of descriptions of entropy, and entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics. That's not a cause and effect relationship. No, it's used in the bait and switch when they start calling them scientific laws to help grease the skids when they use their pseudoscience claims and call them science also. Well, obviously, it's like the scientific laws. You know, they're not causal either, but they're still scientific. No, they're not. They're just descriptions. And when you're describing it with relationship to t, well, that's entropy, right? Difference with time. So yeah, plotting a rate of decay and describing it mathematically with time doesn't give you a causal attribution that's acquired with experiment. I'll put Adam.
I like the way you went to entropy, because when this is put to you, you try to no. This is, you know, going back, chewing over stuff with Q back in the past. And you go to it, and entropy is the final point. We go, well, we plot that. That's what entropy is, until it does, like I say, slap you around the head like a big wet fish. That no, time isn't the cause of entropy, is it? Again, all you're doing is measuring rate of change. And that's why it can't be your independent variable. But it's a very useful tool for studying.
Yeah. It reminds me of the end of the discussion between yourself, John D, and QE. Although I was present, I didn't really say very much. Very much a listener, a participant that didn't say much. At the end, the conclusion, it's like, well, if this is just a second order effect of entropy, basically pissing in the wind, trying to establish the cause of this when looking at relative density or relative density disequilibrium. But it's like, yeah, we're not going to get to the cause of entropy. So what are we doing again? This is futile.
That was memorable for you. That was a long time ago.
Really stuck in my mind because there was so much discussion about gravity at the time.
Yep.
And obviously everybody who was in that discussion had a very good understanding about relative density. But I can't remember who even asked the question, to be honest, but it's just trying to ascribe cause. I think it started with vectors. We're like, no, you know, this is I'm going to rehash the conversation if I'm not careful, but the conclusion was, no, we're talking about second order effect of entropy, therefore trying to establish the cause of that is just absolutely ludicrous. No one's ever going to do that.
Was it Life is Short that started that, or am I confusing that with another discussion?
I think it was. I think you're right.
Adam, you remember that?
You know what I remember? I was in Italy, so I'm sat there under the gazebo, just enjoying a little glass of wine, just chatting in the late afternoons, because there's the hour difference. That's kind of what I remember, but I also remember it's one of those times where there's a really high level of conversation going off. There's no bullshit, no bravado. And all of you are happy to admit you haven't got a clue. And that's the conclusion we kind of came to. But it was one of the most genuine, I wouldn't say debates, discussions and figuring outs that I've ever been involved in. It was memorable for me too, Nate.
It went on for quite some time. That was not a short discussion. I think it was a couple days.
It was more than that.
Was it?
I remember it as being a couple of weeks, but it was more than a couple of days. It went on for a while. Several days of discussion.
I don't think I was in on it at the beginning, right at the very beginning, but then I started reading it, and then it started irritating me, and then I jumped in.
It was in the days when Spurs Chemo was talking gas pressure with Ranty, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it was instigated by stuff around that.
Possible.
Yeah. I remember trying to stick up the moon.
Claim that Spurs was making at the time. His channel was based on it. So his channel's now called Under No Pressure. Or it was. It's now called Smarter Than a Flat Earther. But at the time, he was like making some absurd claim. I can't really put my finger on it. I blanked it out because it infuriated me at the time. But he was saying something to the effect of there is no gas pressure or something like that.
Exactly. That's what he was saying. There's no such thing as gas pressure.
I think he was saying if you remove the water vapor, that it changes everything. Or something like that.
He was anti-gas pressure. I remember.
Anti-gas pressure. Just hearing it said is absurd. He's anti-gas pressure, that one. What?
I remember you threatening him. It was insane. It was completely nonsensical, wasn't he? In terms of, I'm pretty sure I remember you threatening to kick him out because you were sick.
I was just going to say that. You threatened to kick him out one time.
Yeah, sure.
I vaguely remember saying that if he ever talked about not having gas pressure again, he'd be disowned from the cult and wouldn't be allowed back in. On the contrary, I might have threatened to kick him out because he was getting that annoying. More likely, that's often projection when that happens. In other words, I've started swearing so much at the opponent that it's like, if I don't kick this person out, I can't leave. I'm running the show. But I'm so infuriated that I'm swearing and losing my temper with them.
It was all the things that we love about Spurs now, dealing with the ballers, but he was bringing that, and he had no argument, right? But he was impervious to anything that you were saying to him. You'd prove the point, and he'd just come back with the same statement, with the same, like, Spurs special imperviousness. It was that level of frustration, because I think we had spent a long time explaining, re-explaining, re-going through the same point. For him to go back, like back then, to be fair, in full proper baller style. Hence the frustration.
It's come back to me. It was worse than baller. Excuse me. It's come back to me what he did that used to infuriate me so much. So Spurs is not an intelligent guy. Therefore, you'd go through whatever response, and he would repeat it back to you, and you'd think you were getting somewhere. And at the end, it'd say, and that's all very well and good. Right? And then he'd restate the claim. So you'd be like, what? So you're acknowledging everything I've said, which clearly annihilates your point. And after accepting it, no, not accepting it, just parroting it back so I haven't heard it. So where are you going to go from here? Because I have definitely heard it, but I'm still going to reassert the same exact nonsense.
All right, ready to move on? We'll finish up with the last section, showing you what's not science. Now remember, the entire goal of the scientific method, real easy, to elucidate or reveal cause and effect relationships. Natural cause and effect relationships, by the way. That is explanation by demonstration of the hows and the whys. That leads to scientific theories. Not describe the what's and the isn't. So here's some examples that are thrown around, especially the second one. Identifying mitochondria or Golgi apparatus in eukaryotes, right? This is not friggin' science, even though it's associated with biology. There is no cause and effect relationship here. You see this identifying or discovering is another word? That's not, it has nothing to do with the scientific method. There's no hypothesis here. There's no natural cause and effect relationship, but it's associated with biology. So people say, yeah, that's science. No, it's not. Another one, identifying the spin of an electron. Is that science? Nope. Why? Because of this word right here. Identifying or discovering. Not that that's not important. It's not what I'm saying. Or that it's not, your answers are not true. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it's not science. Period. Non sequitur. Categorizing organisms in the taxonomic classification system, right? Is that science? Nope. That's glorified collating. That's all it is. It's associated with biology, right? But it's not science. That's why I say you have to take each specific claim, no matter the discipline, and evaluate it on its own merits and tenets. Because there's a lot of things in actual scientific disciplines that are not science. Don't have anything to do with it. I hope that's clear. Subtle, but important point again. Maths. This has been going on for how long, right? Ever since the beginning. So mathematics isn't science or physics, much like a tape measure isn't carpentry. One of the main reasons is they're different words. I've had this in this presentation since day one. This is oldie. Hasn't changed. Let's take a look at what Richard Feynman has to say about this, because they worship him. You know, the Baltards worship Richard Feynman. They got statues and everything. So let's see what he has to say about this. This is from the Feynman lectures. I mean, from their Bible. Mathematics is not a science from our point of view, in the sense that it is not a natural science. The test of its validity is not experiment. Now, in this particular case, he is exactly right. Now, what's the implication of this statement outside of mathematics? I'll read it again. Mathematics is not a science from our point of view in the sense that it is not a natural science. The test of its validity is not experiment. So what's he saying? Well, to be natural science, you must be able to test by experiment. That's it. Exactly what I've been saying for how many years now? That's embedded in that short statement, dragging mathematics around by short hairs. Hopefully everyone sees that. From Dr. Carey Mullis, another Nobel laureate biochemistry, and mathematics, which is really not science. Duh. Why are these people saying this? From Professor Balakrishnan, Professor of Physics, ITT Madras. That's the whole point about physics. It's not mathematics. I don't know what to say, guys. So it's not a set of axioms from which you derive results. The rules of the game you prepare to change and subsume even in a broader framework. Mathematics has nothing to do with science or the scientific method. Nothing. I can kill it quick by just saying it's quantitative, when the entire scientific method is qualitative. That right there kills it. Right? I could go into 10 other reasons. Some of the reasons were just mentioned here. Quantum mechanics, we can go to Professor Shankar. Quantum mechanics, it's a theory which is based on experiment. It's not deduced by mathematics. I heard somebody say this the other day. QM mathematics. I said, what? Not based on mathematics. You're just parroting it's nonsense you heard somewhere. Right? It's all quantum mechanics. All based on experiment. Nothing to do with mathematics. Now, you can be able to describe it in a mathematical sense. Right? You may be able to do that. Yeah. They had to invent mathematics to describe quantum mechanics. So it's a conjured convention. That's all mathematics is. Right? Not saying it's not useful. I'm just saying it's not science. It's not natural science. I don't have to say it. Friggin' Richard Feynman told you. It's not a natural science, period. Not. Why? No experiment. Prosecution rests. Maths don't prove anything. In reality, one of, I've had this in here for a long time, but this is one of Anthony or Tony's favorites. For example, 1 apple minus 6 apples equals -5 apples. So show us -5 apples. You can't do that in reality because it doesn't exist. And the best one, and Betty slammed GeoStreamer with this. It was perfectly timed too. She just led him right to it. Give us the equation for germ theory. They consider germ theory science, and if mathematics is science, then germ theory must have an equation. Go ahead and post it. It's a belly laugher. It's non sequitur from Black Lagoon. He tried to chase it down too. He was asking people in the chat, please, and they're saying, shh, trying to give him the hook, like, cut it. No. Too funny, man. That's some good memories back there. Math is immaterial. It's abstract, rigidly domain specific, and at best merely describes, at the very best. It's what it does. Most of the time, it doesn't even do that. It explains exactly squat, nada, niente. Conversely, actual scientists are in the business of explaining phenomena by validating or invalidating cause and effect relationships between independent and dependent variables via rigorous hypothesis testing. Can you show one case in all of history where mathematics caused any phenomena? No, it's non sequitur. Can you show the laws of motion? Debunked. Equations causing a billiard ball to roll across the table, even if they weren't debunked. It's a non sequitur statement, right? Laws don't cause things. Laws of motion don't cause anything. Lunatic. It's preposterous. According to mathematics, there's an infinite distance between point A and point B, otherwise known as Zeno's paradox. That is, if I shoot an arrow, I must have knew something was going on right here. Telling the future, prophetic. I digress. That is, if I shoot an arrow from my back porch to the tree 20 feet away, the arrow should never reach the friggin' tree. Why? Because there's an infinite number of points between point A and point B. I think they use different examples with it. I think it was tortoise and somebody, I can't remember. Right? Same premise. Yep. In mathematics, my arrow should never reach that tree because there's an infinite number of points between point A and point B, mathematically speaking. Models. We still hear this. I don't know why. I thought we pretty much dealt a death blow to this like 3.5, 4 years ago, but it's so hard. It's dug in like an Alabama tick with those ball-tard spinning space monkeys. You have to get them down on the ground and get a spoon, hold them down like 10 people, get a spoon, dig that thing out. I don't think it's going to work anyway. It'll just pop right back in there. So models, they're reification fallacies. Let's take it right from their alma mater wiki. Reification, also known as concretism, Nathan's favorite word, hypostatization, or the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. It's a fallacy of ambiguity. When an abstraction, that is an abstract belief or hypothetical construct, is treated as if it were a concrete real event or a physical entity. In other words, it is the error of treating something that is not concrete, such as an idea, as a concrete thing. A common case of reification is the confusion of a model with reality. Map is not the territory. There's so many examples. Now, if you're using reification as a rhetorical device, it's not reification. If you're using a rhetorical device as metaphors and stuff to, spice up stories and things, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to say, stop reification fallacy, because it's not, right? That's story time. That's allowed. But if you're using reification as proof of something, then you're going to get hammered. I'm going to hammer on you, right? Simply. Like space and time. That's what I was saying the other day when you guys were talking about quantum mechanics killing Einstein, and I brought up the fact that it's just both his theories, which are not scientific theories, by the way, both his theories are reification fallacies right on our faces, and incoherent third graders can debunk them. Why? Because what Einstein did was reified concepts, space, and time as concrete, as in you can physically dilate, bend, and warp non-physical concepts. That's classic reification fallacy. He's through. It's all over. Incoherent third graders at recess can debunk both of his so-called theories before they're out of recess. So, models in science. And from Stanford. So, we're up on the totem pole here. Models in science. Let's go ahead and see how many there are. We've got probing models. We got phenomenological models. We got computational models, developmental models, explanatory, impoverished, testing, idealized, theoretical, scale, heuristic, caricature, didactic, fantasy, toy, imaginary, mathematical, substitute, iconic, formal, analog, and instrumental models. What are you joking? Nope, they ain't joking. I especially like this one, where they finish up the discussion more or less. From stanford.edu. Models play an important role in science, but despite the fact that they have generated considerable interest among philosophers, they've generated significant interest among ball-tard spinning space monkeys. Same thing, we could put ball-tard spinning space monkeys in there, we'll be good. But I digress. There remains significant lacunas. I remember seeing that term for the first time. I was saying, what? Is that like a fish or something? Or a race car? In our understanding of what models are and how they work. So I said, let's go look that word up, because that's something that people probably wouldn't do, right? But I did it. This is what it means. Lacuna. A blank space or a missing part. Gap. So models remain, there's significant gaps or blank spaces in them. Too funny. So they purport to promote models and in the same breath basically say that it's nonsense. Essentially. Which I thought was pretty funny. Remember this, man. I posted this. I keep on posting this throughout the presentation. The important point that Becker introduced. Oh, not this one. Sorry. We'll get to the one I point out. But this is really good. The important point that Becker, and we'll get back to him in a second, introduced is that the explanation of a natural phenomena, and then they say that is model or theory. So they seem to be equating models and scientific theories. But I'll just let that go. Must be testable by experimentation. In other words, once a model is proposed as an explanation of a phenomena, it can only be considered a scientific model if it can be objectively tested by experiment. That's the only way. That's from the University of Indiana Chemistry Department. Guess who this is? Becker. His first name's Johann. Johann Becker. Johann Becker was a key proponent to phlogiston theory, right? Seems like he learned his lesson after that, right? Because it was just crushed, right? Because they were just speculating and stuff and then calling it science. Well, it's not science. They learned their lesson. So the only way a scientific model can exist if it's tested by experiment. So if anyone says model, then I say, no, all right. So you have a scientific model. Okie dokie. Natural phenomena observed, please. Alternative hypothesis. So you just go down the list, right? Because if you have to have experiment, then you have to have all these guys. Remember this from back in the day? We always talk about this fondly, right? So they have to have that. If they don't have that, then they don't have a scientific model, period. Questions, comments?
Looked up lacuna in the Pete Shea dictionary. It actually means not a problem. So it's lacuna, like laguna, as in Lacuna matata means no worries.
How about Black Laguna?
A good presentation. I love it.
Thank you. It's not done. We've got a few more parts to get. Not today, but we've got a few more to go.
Not a lot to add. Go on, Brian.
Brian.
You go, Adam. I go after you.
That's only a little point. Just at the end there, you started this with suppose and presuppose, and you ended it there talking about phlogiston, which had all sorts of merits, all sorts of ways of validating the presupposition that in all combustible bodies, a certain thing called phlogiston will be released. And that's the error, even if you use empiricism, but you start with a presupposition. And that's the beauty of science to me. It starts at the beginnings, and you shouldn't build on presupposition. Some of the things we make daft mistakes, but yeah. I think the phlogiston example is a good one where you can be empirical, but if you presuppose something, and there's that corporate saying, isn't there? If you assume something, it makes an ass out of you and me. And phlogiston, I think, demonstrates that well.
Finished, Adam?
Yes, bro.
Okay. I was just going to say, I was going to say this earlier on the back of a point Adam was making. Just for reference, Adam was saying that a science experiment doesn't have to be some kind of fantastic thing. It just a simple demonstration, proof, a simple proof through a simple demonstration is enough. And I was going to talk about Anthony's egg test, because the reason I'm going to say about that is that in high schools they teach that to young people, and then they kind of term it or kind of give the impression that it's like kind of the least of science. It's kind of a nice little learning or a nice little experiment to do, just to learn about science. But then straight afterwards they'll start telling you about all kinds of other rubbish. So it ends up being something that people don't take serious. Whereas that is the most important thing anyone learned in science class in high school. And all this other nonsense, majority of the rest of the other nonsense they were taught doesn't matter. And that's why that little egg test drives our opposition up the wall, because they believe that that's a nothing. Well, that's an everything, not a nothing. They have nothing. That is everything, because that is an answer, not more questions. Do you know what I mean? So people might put down things like that and kind of laugh at them, or say an egg test, a floating egg. And even people on our own side, Bob Nodell has put it down. It's like, because they don't understand. That is an answer. You don't have to go back and try and find another answer or change the answer some other time. You have it. It's done. You can move on.
Unless you have an agenda.
Before we get to that just speaks nicely to what Adam said earlier, doesn't it, Brian? And what you said about logic, in fact. So, there's no better, best, good. It's like, has it passed through the logic gate or hasn't it? If it has, if it's been validated by experiment and you've validated your alternative, then it's no more or less of an experimentally empirical piece of evidence than anything else that goes through a really complicated experimental apparatus. The complexity of the apparatus doesn't lend credence to how valid or invalid your experiment was. In this case, Brian's absolutely correct. It's like they're saying this isn't very important. Joking. It's experimental validity This is an empirical result that is being provided to you by Anthony in the form of this egg test. What's a test? Well, in this term, scientific test. Well, what's a scientific test? Well, it's the actualization of what we've discussed today. Hypothesis. So what Anthony's done with the egg test is an experiment. Hypothesis test. A hypothesis test. He's taken a hypothesis with an presumed cause of an effect that he's seen in nature, and he's proposed his cause with a supposition of cause, and then he's proposed it in a null. That would be his supposition of cause won't cause the effect. He's then gone on to experimentally validate his hypothesis. Now, that is just as powerful as any other experiment. There's no good, better, or best, as Adam said. It's just passed through the logic gate. Out the other side, it's perfectly valid. And when you say it's everything compared to their nothing, well, yeah, they've got a just-so story with reified concepts and pseudo-4 space-time being bent. And so he's got an actual empirical experiment. There's a big distinction there. Right, Brian?
Thank you, Neil.
Come on, Neil. You want to twist some old knives or something?
I just said unless you have an agenda. Come on.
Well, I mean, sorry, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think Scrat is flat. Sorry, I had you on mute, man. I forgot. I just looked back and I caught it. I think Scrat has a question. Shockingly.
I'll just save it for the end. I'll just save it for the end because it's actually back on the hypothesis part. So I'll save it for the final thoughts.
A question for the final thoughts? This is question time.
You couldn't be more on topic.
Well,
Normally we're having to fight people off because they don't want to talk about the actual subject matter. You've got something on point. Go, go, go.
Well, it's about the hypothesis. I mean, the null. Okay. When it comes to the null, actually, I think I'm going to be roboting here. I'll wait until I'm in a better area. Sorry.
Okay.
So close.
What a tease.
English got a question. From
No.
How's that let down?
What's an agenda? Is it one of those fancy cakes?
Oh, by the way, anyone, I just want to remind everyone that if you click into the description box, there is a link to this voice channel that you can come in. You could challenge anything that was brought up here today. No worries.
The agenda to the next 10 members.
Can I add on to what I was?
Go on, Brian. My crappy joke can wait.
I thought you were. I didn't know. I thought I spoke just as you were speaking, Nathan. Just add on to the importance of Anthony's egg test is he proves with that test that the medium has to be taken into account if you're going to be claiming a cause to matter vector directionality, whether it goes apparently up or apparently down. You have to take the medium into account. And he proved it with that. The very thing, as he states himself, would Isaac Newton, would he have taken notice of that if he had thought of it? Oh, hang on, the medium. Maybe he would have. So people laugh at that because it's an experiment. But they're completely missing that experiment destroyed a belief and destroys a belief a huge amount of the Western world have. And people are being taught it in schools and colleges all the time, that there's this force of gravity. And Anthony's experiment shows that there isn't. That you have to take the medium into account. And it's just a differential between the medium and the egg. So it's very important.
Making gravity extinct was very exciting, and it was assisted by Anthony's existentialism. Excellent.
We covered, I think, the debates not long ago discussing Newton's laws, and I think Brian he does pay homage to it. He recognises. He says, notwithstanding, I think, the effects of the air. Those, I think, he recognises them as retardant effects, not as you describe, as actually considering that this is an overall an effect of within a medium. But I do think he does recognise that it does do something, but I think his recognition sits outside of what we're implying, because what he's trying to do is, and I want to give a shout out to explain how here. He's given a quote from Dr. Maths, but he kind of summarised what Newton's doing. Is mathematics deals not with reality, but with an abstraction of reality, a model of just one aspect of the reality we use to describe it. And that's what Newton's laws are doing there. And I say, I don't think he doesn't ignore it. He recognises it, but he doesn't want to take account for it in his mathematical description he's about to give. Because to account for reality is too complicated. He's literally just talking about shoving an object, and all things being equal, and this is where the ballers grab it, because the only way to describe his all things being equal, it would be to be in the vacuum of space. Yeah, not that that's his conception, but that's the only way you could really conceptualize neutral in the way that Newton wants to describe it mathematically. So the only way he can describe it mathematically in the way he wants to simplify it is outside of reality. I know that's a ramble, but that quote I thought was pertinent with regards to Newton.
Well, I made a video a while back, and I can't say it was really a super serious video. It was more like just poking the borders, really. But yes, it has validity. As in, Newton's original Principia, he wrote it in Latin. So when he speaks about the word, when he uses the word missa is an accumulation of stuff, if it's translated into English. And that's where the word mass that they started using came from. And then he also uses the word gravitas, which means heavy or weight. So he's working off of accumulation of stuff creates a weight in a very basic form. Like he didn't state that there's this, like, gravitas. It does not claim, the word gravitas translated into English does not claim a cause to weight. It refers to weight or describes weight. It doesn't claim a cause, whereas gravity claims a cause to weight. So, I mean, like, we know that a lot of what he did was kind of taken and turned into something else, and then it was ascribed to him, even though he specifically said he didn't want it ascribed to him. But I mean, like, he wasn't going around like, initially anyway. If he wrote it in Latin, because the word gravity didn't exist back then in Latin or English. It turned up afterwards. It's like, that's where it came from. It came from the word gravitas, meaning heavy or weight, and then that became gravity became a force that causes weight. It's a very different thing, isn't it? Whereas gravitas is a description, gravity is a claim. So I mean, what was he really when he first started? I don't know where I can't say I've read enough about him to know where he really went afterwards. But basically, from what I can find, why would you write something in Latin and use words that don't describe? If you're trying to describe a thing called gravity, which is a force that causes weight, why would you use the word gravitas, which just means weight or heavy? There's no claim of cause there. So, you know, I think that he wasn't, he obviously wasn't trying to come up with this crazy theory. You know, I think he was mostly spitballing.
It wasn't.
Obviously,
like most things, he got hijacked. So you utilize a description and then just describe causal attributes to that description. Then once that's been ascribed with causal attributes, when it's just an effect that could be described in terms of Newtonian gravitation, then that gets transposed into other effects outside of the original hijacking of a description. They take what they've then created, which is a fictional force that doesn't exist, and then they can ascribe it to whatever they like, whenever they like. That's all they've done. So no, I don't think Newton wanted that at all. In fact, in his letter to, I forget who, someone will remind me, made it very clear that he didn't want innate gravity ascribed to him. So what do you want? He didn't want it, it's just describing something.
Yeah, like that's my point. Like he was just describing things. Like that's why when he wrote his Principia in Latin, he was using the word gravitas, which just describes weight or heavy. You know, missa, which just describes an accumulation of something. You know, accumulation, a bigger accumulation of matter will give more weight on a scale, let's just say. You know, but he's not claiming a cause to this weight or to what causes the weight, other than, if you want to say, other than using the word missa, meaning an accumulation of stuff. It's like they just took whatever he was doing and decided to turn it into some fantastical thing. And like, to be honest with you, where did it really come from? Because 9.8 M2 didn't turn up till 1896. So we're given the impression, and people are given the impression in colleges, and that this force of gravity has been known about for eons. They didn't even have 9.8 M2 until 1896. And then that was taken by Einstein, 20 years later, 20 years later, taken by Einstein. And instead of it being a downward acceleration, it became an upward acceleration of 9.8 M2.
There is no,
for how long?
There is no acceleration in Newton or in Einsteinian mechanics.
Does he not have 9.8 M2?
No,
upward
no, there is no acceleration. No.
I thought he had that in his field equations.
No, if you listen to my Veritasium little spill, there is no weight in Einsteinian mechanics and there is no acceleration.
But he does claim, though, that the Earth accelerates up the way at 9.8 M2. Does he not, Einstein?
There's no acceleration in it?
No.
Oh, that's new to me.
We should go ahead and listen to that. See if I can snatch that up real quick. You guys will have to go to the watch page, though.
No, I'd be happily, tuning into the watch page to see that. I don't recall what this is, so maybe can you multitask and tell us as you're digging it out, or is that not possible?
No, it's an audio. I play it. It's Veritasium's take on the gravity is not a force. Remember that video he made some time ago? I took a couple excerpts out of it.
Can I ask a question before you press play?
Yes.
Did he not use 9.8 M2 to claim that the Earth was accelerating upward at that rate?
If he did, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Thank you.
Hold on. Let me stop it. Let me go back. All right, guys, if you go to the watch page, and then I'll go ahead and play it. Here we go.
According to the general theory of relativity, gravity is not a force. There are no gravitational fields. Gravity is kind of an illusion.
What the hell did you just say?
Gravity is kind of an illusion. In general relativity, there is no mystery. All objects appear to fall the same way because, well, they're not accelerating.
Oh, son of a... That's gonna leave a mark. Let's put another shrimp on the barbie.
Gravity is just like that force. It doesn't actually exist.
Say what?
But in general relativity, there is no gravitational force. There is no gravitational field. Gravitational fields do not exist.
Prepare yourself.
Ball tards.
In standard Newtonian physics, we draw your weight force, the force of gravity pushing you down, and the normal force from the floor pushing you up. We say these forces are equal and opposite, so there's no net force on you, so you are not accelerating. But in general relativity, gravity is not a force. You have no weight, so the only force on you are these normal forces pushing you up. Gravity is not a force. There are no gravitational fields. You have no weight. Well, they're not accelerating. Gravity is kind of an illusion.
Gravity is just like that force. It doesn't actually exist.
Hello, baby.
Oh, well, everybody's heard about the bird. The bird's a winner.
There you go.
So he said the only force is the normal force that pushes you up.
Yep.
So that's presumably what you're referring to, Brian, when you've heard it. I was going to reference Brian Cox, who said something similar.
He did.
About,
He did.
Right, but that's what you're talking about, correct, Brian?
Well, yeah, Anthony just he just reminded me there. He says in chat that he did state that there was a 9.8 M2 upward acceleration, and it's part of his equivalence principle. I couldn't remember the name of what I was looking for. That's what Anthony says.
Okay.
So, no weight, no gravitational fields, no acceleration.
This kind of lends to what Tony's been doing, really. The ludicrousness of how we all understand it, this imaginary attraction between forces, how we're still teaching it to children, that we get to the point of describing it mathematically when it's all imaginary, none of it's like that in the way we now have to describe it as reality in an Einsteinian way. It kind of exemplifies the good fight that Tony's fighting, to me. This kind of nonsensical buffoonery, to steal your vernacular, John, is being pimped to our kids. It needs to stop.
It's also nice to hear because it surprises me we don't, draw the conclusion afterwards that that's not what this show today is about. But in the past, Quantum Eraser, you've said we want you to actually parrot the correct current heliocentric pseudoscience so we can pummel it into the middle of next week. Now we have someone like Veritasium who's actually, parroting off the... It surprises me again because he's not just parroting it off in a way that says this is how it does work. He's saying this is how your misconceptions are aligned with Einsteinian gravitation.
Yes.
So he's actually pummeling it. He's not just parroting off the correct pseudoscience so we can pummel it. He's doing it for us. It's like, what? That's why we've got all the laugh tracks all the way along, because you're laughing because he's like, yeah, that's just what we say. Yep. That's what we're pummeling it with.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, nice to see. I gave a heartfelt shout out to Veritasium in exactly that respect, because he's on. I described him as being like the tail end of the spear. In other words, he doesn't have to declare himself as being a flat earther And I compared him to Jaron, who a couple of years ago was like, I wish I'd never come out as a flat earther, and just sort of attacked the inconsistencies in the current rhetoric. I could have done that without any issue or any ridicule. You're like, what, like Veritasium's doing? That's essentially what he's doing, because he still manages to maintain relationships with people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, whilst at the tail end of the same spear we're, using, because he's got the exact same arguments. He's pointing out the same stuff we do.
Yep.
But he's still friends with Neil deGrasse Tyson, eh? Well, wouldn't that be a lovely position to be in? I'd love to be in his position. Kudos to you, Veritasium, my little boat.
All right.
All he's sorry to just I left a big pause, but all he's done is looked at it. That's all he's done.
Yep.
Okay, can I say what I was going to say about the null hypothesis?
Oh yeah. Yep. I was just going to ask you about that, Scrat. Go ahead.
Well, when I think about this, I know Anthony loves the not Anthony. Yeah, Nathan. Sorry. Nathan loves the null hypothesis. But when I think about it, it's like, is the null hypothesis even really needed? Because once you see that the alternative hypothesis is wrong, I mean, isn't that just a logical conclusion that, this did not do this? So do they have the null because a experiment has to prove something? Am I making any sense? Or it seems like it's unnecessary.
No, informally, you're right. It's implied, right? It's just the mirror image of the alternative, right? Formally, you go ahead and put the null down because that's what you're trying to do. The mission is to try to reject or falsify the null. And how do you do that? Well, you validate the alternative.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
If you again go back to Brian's point about it being logic based, you're trying to push it through one gate or the other because of the mutual exclusivity of the two different results, and it's formally stated, and that's what it is. It's a formal hypothesis when you lay it down with an alternative and a null, and you lay down your independent, your dependent, and your control variables. You're doing it formally. It's because it has that. You could just say it's implied. Then when you laid it down logically, it wouldn't have the empiricism attached because it didn't have one or other, the mutual exclusivity of the two different results. It's just implied. That's not good enough in terms of logic. You need to actually state it overtly.
You're not mentioning the null from a kind of positive thinking point of view. From an empirical point of view, the fact that you're able to reject your experimental hypothesis because you've been empirical and you've set things up so that the null still has a validity to it. It maybe isn't what you hope for. It's not fulfilled your supposed theory, yeah? But when you come out of it, because you've been empirical, the way you summarize the null, it gives you something still definitive to not have to presuppose for your next bit of inquiry. Yeah, you've still got something solid to take from that. So, whilst it might seem trimmings, in the failure of the supposed failure of the experiment, it still allows you to take something definitive out of it from the empirical way in which you've set everything up.
I think it's a kind of a... Sorry, go on, Scrat.
Well, so is it called the alternative hypothesis because it's alternative to the null? Because if that's so, it sounds like the null is the most important. I mean, it's like you come up with that first, and then you have a alternative, which seems kind of backwards.
Yeah, you're trying to invalidate the zero difference. You're trying, sounds weird, not to get a zero difference result. Yeah. In other words, the contrapositive is you're trying to get a positive result. The contrapositive of the positive. But yeah, you're trying to rule out the null. In other words, when you say it's logically implied, yeah, well, yeah, it is, because you're saying the zero difference result when you say the null. Well, you're trying to not get a zero difference result. You're trying to cause the effect. Yeah, you're trying to get the effect to happen. So yeah, you're trying to rule out a zero difference result. So you're trying to invalidate the null, therefore validate the alternative.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I think the null hypothesis is important because it's for logging purposes. So you can show the steps that you took to prove that this is not the cause of that. If you know what I mean, for the future maybe, or something. Just you're showing that, because I suppose if you were trying to find out the cause of an effect, you might, this is why the ballers always say, that, they say this stupid thing that science doesn't prove things. So they don't understand that there's going to be more null hypotheses proven than positive, or what they call alternative hypothesis. Because you're going to, more than likely, but most times, you're going to go through 4 or 5 different things that are wrong before you get to the thing that's right. So it can all become part of your body of work, I suppose, on the subject. You can say, these things were wrong, this is how we showed it was wrong, this is the right one, this is how we show it's the right one. That kind of way, kind of gives a kind of a confidence to it, or adds meat to it. Maybe that's the...
Yeah. Yes, you're right, but you're kind of overcomplicating it. So you got it right the first time when you said it's just logic. So if you imagine 2 pens, each with a gate, and when you pick up, outside of those 2 pens, you've got an enormous stack of stuff. Now, if you only develop within your, in this case, hypothesis, one gate that can open, which would be if you get the cause correct and it goes into that pen, yeah? Well, you're only ever needing one thing to go into that pen, aren't you? You've only got one logic gate set up. If A, then B. So what happens? You pick up your first item, you try and push it through the first gate, but it doesn't go through. Well, what happens with that item? You chuck it back on the pile? Because there's no other process for it to go through. You need a second step. For a dumb computer to understand it, for instance, garbage in, garbage out being the idea, you need the computer to say, if A, then B, put into pen 1. If A, not B, put into pen 2. So you've got both of the outcomes, and no matter what happens, each time you pick up an item, it's going to go into one or other pen. But if you don't have the gate set up for if A, not B, then you don't have a process to put it through a gate into a pen. So you need that laid down in logic terms for it to make sense. If you're just thinking dumb computing terms, computers are stupid. If you don't tell it what to do with the item, if it doesn't go into gate 1, it doesn't know what to do with it. So it crashes. You've got to say, well, if it doesn't go into gate 1, what you then do with it is put it into gate 2. Simple.
Yeah, well, I couldn't disagree with that. It's, to me, if you're going to formulate that, if we sat around as a group and tried to formulate, everyone here now tried to formulate the best way to find a cause to an effect, it would be all those steps, including the null hypothesis, because we would have to detail every part of what we do. So you're not leaving room for any kind of pre-assumptions or anything in the future to come into it. You're making sure, even like it might seem like I understand Scrat's point, because people would think that and do think that. It's like, why have you got a null hypothesis when it kind of doesn't matter? It's not the proven cause. But it as a series of steps, logical steps, to definitely find out whether something is or is not, you will have to give some validity to the null, that what you've proven doesn't cause it. It's kind of like robotic. Like as you said, the computers is a good example. It's robotic. It's either this or it's that. It's that, so it's not this. And it's like that's the kind of.
You're not
Strictness,
including
maybe.
the end goal, though, when you state it that way. So the end goal, quantum eraser described as to invalidate the null. Again, in logic terms or computer terms, invalidate the null means close the door on pen 2. Now, the only way you can close the door on pen 2, in other words, stop putting things that aren't the cause through that door, is to find the cause. So the moment you get the cause, you close the door on pen 2, you stop putting items into it because you've then got the item. At that point, you've invalidated the null. You've closed the door on things that don't cause it. Why? Well, because you've got the thing that does cause it. Now, if you haven't invalidated the null, you can continue to put things through the process. You can still go through the if A and B, no, can't put it through into pen 1, so therefore must go into pen 2. And it goes into the pen, and the process continues until you invalidate the null. That would be to close the door on things that don't cause it. You only need one, and then that completes the process. And that sort of speaks to Scrat's question more than anything, actually. But yeah, there you go. Just logic. You're right, Ryan.
Just to, again, play up the significance in an experiment, if you end up validating your null, you've gone to all of this effort. You don't just pluck these things, these experiments up out of the air to do from nowhere. You're using all of your knowledge to get the point of experiment. If you use all of your knowledge and actually you end up validating the null, that should be quite profound to you. It's not something that is insignificant.
Yeah, like saying, well, phlogiston is the cause of X, Y, and Z. And then you get back to the middle part of QE's presentation. You know, it's got to be real. You've got to actually be able to vary and manipulate it.
The point, I mean, is you go to a lot of effort not to validate nulls. Yeah, the purpose isn't to validate nulls. If you've gone to all that effort, if you get a null, and it really is quite significant because it contradicts your thinking. Is the point I'm making? It says, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right. Yeah, because you've gone to all that bloody effort to do an experiment that proves nothing in terms of where your supposed ideas were leading you, and it stops that. Yeah.
What you're saying is that the guy who supposes that scurvy is caused by seawater has pondered what could be causing this. What are they doing that's different to me? And I logically deduce it must have something to do with the seawater because of this, that, and the other ascribed to their skin or whatever it is that he decides. He thinks at that stage that is the cause. In other words, he says, I suppose that is the cause of the effect. And you go forth, formulate your hypothesis, you establish your seawater as your IV, get your test subject, poor sod, and you vary your IV, and nothing happens. And you're saying at that point, you go, the guy's scratching his head going, bloody hell, I really thought it would be seawater.
Brilliant analogy. Yeah. Every day you do all sorts of different ways of exposing him to seawater, and every single time validating. Stop it. There's like I say, something ain't right. Change what you're supposing because you're wasting your time in your supposition there. As empirical as it is, and that is the power of the null.
Every time you put that seawater through as the IV, it goes into gate 2 and the door remains open. And all you're trying to do is close the door to gate 2. The door to it doesn't cause it. Things that don't cause it, you want to stop piling them on. But every single time you do put one on, you have gone through the process of supposition that it is the cause. You are contemplating it as the cause. In your mind, you've got to actually believe it is the cause. Otherwise, you wouldn't be putting it through the process. But at the end of that, you go, oh my, what a shock. There was me thinking the effect would be at the end of this process, and it wasn't. It just goes into pen number 2, door remains open. But you gotta sort of go. That's when we've had this conversation many times, Adam. But the genius of actual validation of experimentation isn't in the varying and manipulating of the presumed cause of the effect, which is what you'd class as a scientist. He who varies that which is presumed to cause the effect is a scientist, right? He's varying an IV. But that's not the genius, is it? No. The genius is the guy who says, could it be vitamin C? That's the genius guy, right? Not the guy who then goes forth and starts varying the vitamin C content of a human subject. He's following the motions of the scientific method and can definitely have scientist on his badge. But the genius in that scenario is the guy who went, I think it's this.
Yeah. The bloke that noticed that sailors get scurvy is kind of noticing the obvious. The bloke that notices that whenever the man from Del Monte goes sailing, he never gets scurvy. That's the point of genius, where you recognise that subtle nuance in all of those variables that are out there, and you try to just control that one and see what it is. That's like I said, the genius. Well, in that analogy, it's the bloke that noticed that Pedro over there, who brought a bag of oranges with him, he's good on everything. Yeah, his mate from the same place, same area, who hates oranges, he looks really bad. It can be something in that analogy as simple as that, but it's that spotting that subtle nuance and identifying that very small variable that requires research in a way, and sometimes it's not genius, but yeah, to spot it. But yeah, that's Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I thought actually, just want to say, I thought it was genius the way Adam used the man from Del Monte there. He doesn't have scurvy. Yeah, he's not getting it. But yeah, I mean, it's like, well, what don't they have on the boat to eat? Isn't it? I suppose maybe it's like, well, what do they not have when they're out at sea? What is it they don't have that they're ingestion? What is it they're not ingesting? It's like, people call it thinking outside the box, but it's not really. It's just like very simple questions that are overlooked, in place of complicated answers, aren't they?
Unless you take the Hollow Man explanation of genius, wherein one quote-unquote scientist is trying to go through this exact method. So you've got, in this case, the cause being the start of this little path that you're going to walk along being A, and B being the recognition of something being different with the people and why they've got a different category to everyone else to have this effect in the first place. Then honing in on, that would be B, by the way, and then focusing in on the next step, which is C. What is it that I can assume is the cause? How can I see what's being differed in that group of people that I isolated at B? And then you get to D, the assumed actual position of causal relationship that you can validate with experiments. So you've got A, B, C, and D. In Hollow Man, the guy who's saying, look, I always need B and C to get to D. Whereas genius is being able to get from A to D without needing the B and C.
Yeah.
Not many people would just walk into that lab and go, I think it's vitamin C. Right, I'm off to lunch. that ain't happening.
And where was it first discovered that it was vitamin C? Was it in Britain? Was it a scientist in Britain?
Most likely Brian, in it. Let's be honest. We found most things out.
Well, back at that time, I suppose.
I think it was a guy from Orange County.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
On the tip of my tongue, I can't. Getting too
Is it
old.
not a guy from Orange County?
From Orange County.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised Alwyn's not trying to claim some kind of Dutch claim to the use of oranges.
Someone go ahead and look it up. It's the name with an L is ringing.
I'm looking
Hey,
it up.
you're right. It
Reminds
was
me,
actually the man from Del Monte.
There you go.
Frank.
You say
Del
yes.
Monte.
You say yes.
He say yes.
Anybody actually done this experiment? Sure, this isn't all just a conspiracy amongst the fruiters.
You mean starve your children of vitamin C and see?
James Lind. I told you L, right? So I was all over that, man. I couldn't remember it.
Did he coincidentally own lots and lots and lots of lime trees?
Lots and lots and lots of what?
Lime.
Did you say lime trees? I don't know.
You never know. It seemed very suspicious.
So where's James Lind from?
Orange County.
Orange County.
A Scottish doctor.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they're saying here. It was
There you go.
a Scottish doctor.
There you go.
Ah, I see. So definitely.
I knew
can't
it was
be.
egotistical, but valid.
So you guys in England take Scottish discoveries as your own?
British, I said.
Oh, British.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah, no, that needs explaining.
Yeah.
So if there's a Scottish personality that's doing well in sport, he becomes Adam.
British. He's a British sporting hero.
Correct. And if that same Scottish/British hero loses, he becomes
Scottish.
A plucky Scot.
Scottish.
Got a nice setup. Nice little racket you got going on there.
I remember when Katie Taylor, the female boxer, when she won the gold in I think it was Beijing or somewhere, and the British media tried to claim her because her dad was born in England. So we said, yeah, we'll have Jessica Ennis. She's obviously Irish.
Right, Brian, our egos are bigger than that, mate, right? So when we didn't go to the World Cup in America, we were crap, England, yeah? And the Irish were the only ones that went. We took your glory because at some point we did control that land and pretty much, so pretty much we could support that as one of our home nations, even though blatantly you have major disagreement with that. Doesn't stop it. We'll adopt all of that Irish bit if necessary, if we're desperate at that time. I mean, I loved David O'Leary back then. That's all there was.
O'Leary,
Well-
the British name.
Yeah,
British
because
name, yes, exactly.
it becomes the British Isles then. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, technically, you see that's a subtle nuance. Like, yeah, what is the longest river in Britain and what is the longest river in the British Isles? Two different answers. Both contain Britain, and if it's a bit like a baller, you can do it, can't you? You can use that sort of distinction to not have to admit you don't own it anymore.
This
Yeah.
all comes down to divide and rule. Yeah, that's all this is.
Total imperialism. Yeah.
And science. This is scientific.
Hey, shout out to Sasha Unitox Femu. Many genius assuming and calculating concepts. Thanks, Sasha. Appreciate it. You were saying something, Nathan? Sorry, I rubbished you.
Next week is not next week. In a fortnight's time, will it be experimentation, the focus of the subject matter, or what?
Experiment. I think we already went over experiment. I think the next presentation, if I'm not mistaken, in the line is going to be showing some misconceptions. I think peer review, the logic behind the scientific method, the mistakes many people make, regarding natural science, that sort of, I think that's the next presentation.
Birds humping.
I don't know birds humping. I think your vitamin C is coming back again. The one that you said, I think that's where you got it from. Where I had a number of independent variables, including seawater and a number of them. I think that's coming up. I don't know if that's the next one, but it's coming.
Not natural experiments then.
I don't know if natural and observational studies are coming up on the next one or the one after that.
Okay, cool. You put it in the title, so you don't have to hustle before in the pre-show going, what the hell are we talking about this week?
No, I'm going to put E in the title, and then you can ask me before we start.
Oh, it's just going to be the letter. E. Okay.
I think the first time that we went through all the presentations with science, I put it in the description box, every single topic that was on that video. So I could do it. I'm just getting really lazy lately.
I say don't, because I was impressed with Nathan. Yeah, and I think if we can leave it till next time and see if he can take another random guess at the exact bit, because that was a really bloody good guess. Because genuinely, pre-show, Nathan asked, "What exactly is the bit?" and that introduction, Nathan was spot on, mate. So I think leave it, see if we can do it again.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it post-production.
I got a quick question. Why do they call the quantum eraser experiment a quantum eraser? What does it erase?
What is it? It's more or less, it's the obfuscation. They call it an erasure experiment from back in the day. That's what they labeled it. Erasure or an obfuscation. They obfuscate what path that is being designated, that the whatever photon, whatever is traveling. It's obfuscated. You don't know. It could get there. It can get to the same destination by 2 or more paths. How about that?
Ooh, I like that, John. Hey, imagine if you were known as the quantum obfuscator.
Thanks. Just another name, right?
I'd stick with eraser. I can see why they picked it as well.
Yeah.
What does quantum mean?
Discrete chunk.
Okay. Discrete chunk obfuscator experiment doesn't have the same ring.
Yeah.
It doesn't make the same sense as well, to be honest. It kind of does erase, doesn't it? For me, not that you can prove it, but it is a better description for me in terms of what are you assuming is going off.
All that's happening is that the shorter path will show wave function collapse or not prior to it reaching the photographic plate or sensor on the longer path, right?
Say that one more time.
Showing the result in the same way you get either an interference pattern or not on double slit experiment. It's doing that, but it's got 2 paths that it can take, and on the shorter path it'll show the result that will happen. Will it it knows whether or not it's going to go through the slit on the second path, but even though it hasn't made its way all the way to the plate at the end of the second path, shorter path still knows what the outcome's going to be, and it will always be that outcome. That's my understanding of it. Is that a good shorthand summary?
I suppose. See how I said suppose? It's tentative.
Delayed choice, meaning that whether or not you'll get wave function collapse is that actual outcome is delayed. The first path will show the result before it actually goes and has the choice to make. In other words, it's showing that it's predetermined. It's going to be that result, regardless of it being on a longer path to get to that result. It's already essentially predetermined. It's delayed choice.
It's lunatic. That's the whole thing is outrageous, but that one really puts hair on your chest. That one.
You know when I
Go ahead.
go on, go ahead.
I was just want to make sure I understand. So, unless there's somebody on the beach to see an island, the island does not exist, right?
He's going back to that old presentation, Nathan, that we did a while ago.
No. On the edge of reality, on the edge of what you consider reality, that would be true. No, because as long as the information has ever existed or could ever be accessed, and that island's always going to be in existence for you, I, and everyone else, because we're not on the edge of rendered reality. So, no, I don't like that example in this context. Sorry.
Okay, well, I know that once it is in existence, it's always in existence. But just like I walk out into the woods and nobody's ever seen a tree before, a certain tree. Nobody's ever seen it, and I see it. But does that mean it just came into existence without having to grow? Because it sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah. It's difficult to wrap your head around, but yes, in essence, you are kind of right when you take it to essentially what I described as the edge of rendered reality. You're saying the edge of existence, where nobody has ever seen, there can be no knowledge of it ever having existence to begin with. If you're the first person there and you see rendered reality, number one, how can you contextualize that as knowing that you've seen the edge of rendered reality to make this example make sense? That's the first problem. But if in a hypothetical example, yeah, you're right. If there's never been any predetermined knowledge of that particular rendered piece of reality, in this case a tree, then no, it didn't exist. And yes, it's popped into existence. But this is so far on the fringes of extremity when you're making the example. It's better to make it a little bit absurd so that it doesn't leave a bitter taste in people's mouth. Just to say that you take the original example, which is if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? And the answer you give is there is no tree.
Just to keep it within the quantum experiment. QA question, right? So we set up. We're going to get a pattern or no pattern on the wall, yeah. And we set everything up robotically, and we decide to record the pattern, record which path. We decide to do it, and then, right, we're going to look at it. But what happens is the school burns down, and it destroys everything but the image itself. Now, nobody had looked at the data itself that we assumed had been recorded by the equipment. What will the image be?
Interference pattern.
Right. Could have never developed into, it could have never collapsed. Somehow the universe knows, right, there's a God. And before anything happened, it was already the case that the information wasn't going to exist at the end of the process. Therefore, interference pattern. It was always going to be an interference pattern because there was never the knowledge, because it was going to be burnt down at the end. It couldn't have not been. This is where delayed choice quantum eraser comes in to validate what I've just stated. Correct, John?
Yeah.
See, you know when I talk about reasons why I quit A-level physics, that was one of the. Yeah, you just my head.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. You've got some sort of experimental validity to wrap your head around it, and the delayed choice quantum eraser gives you that. In other words, to say, well, it must have been predetermined because you were giving a computer a process that told it to go and acquire the knowledge of the witch path and record it in a hard drive. Then it all burnt down. And you're saying, well, everything burnt down apart from the photographic plate, which somehow miraculously survived the fire. You go and look and you get an interference pattern. Why? Well, because there was no knowledge of which path it went through. There was never a knower in the process. You telling the computers to acquire the information didn't mean that there was a person with that knowledge. No, that never happened in that process. What happened to the fire? Never happened.
But if it's stored somewhere,
That's better than the tree.
But if it's Adam, if it's stored somewhere,
You can say that. No. You can clarify that. Did one of the hard drives survive in the fire? If so, it collapsed. You've got wave function collapse. If you had a hard drive that survived, which told you which path it went through,
and that is what I say blows my mind. It's just brilliant, but it seems to be demonstrably, experimentally true, and that is just. Well, like one of those moments he's saying, where you have to look and go, "Wow, I'm never going to get this, am I? I can only ever marvel at the majesty and gain whatever scraps that you'll get. But actually, that is so profound that
this is what gave me God.
Yeah, you can't get around it because it's all based on information, right? I mean, you can go down many rabbit holes with it, and it's really cool to think about them. But in the end, at the end of the day, there has to be a knower of, not a knower of the witch path information, but to have information exist, there must be a knower first. In other words,
that's exactly what I was going to say. Forget about the knowledge of the witch path. What's the prerequisite for the information to exist? Knower. If you're talking about knowledge of anything, prerequisite is a knower. That's where it begins. There is a God. That's case closed.
Yep.
Could I quote Werner Heisenberg on that?
A great quote.
Oh yeah. So to quote him, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. At the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you.
Yeah, I haven't heard a better one than that. He's exactly right.
The bottom of the glass is the micro level. Is that kind of what you mean?
The bottom of the glass, what he's talking about here is the superficial knowledge of naturalism. You're as deaf as a post. But once you start digging into more depth, I can see what you're saying there, then it shows the complete opposite of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect timing as the action patterns appear on screen in your.
Oh yeah, I did. I just looked over there. Yeah. Too funny. Going to wrap it up, guys. I'm going to go ahead and start off. So Nathan, you can wrap it up in the end. So this week, be on the lookout for Monday and Wednesday. This is the grand finale of the Numpty Clips. We're going to have M. Scott Veach on Monday, and on Wednesday, Professor Phil Belland. Don't miss these guys. I'm telling you, it's going to be quite shocking. I'm going to go ahead and premiere them either later tonight or early tomorrow morning. It seems that we have some bad weather coming in here, and I wanted to connect this with, if I'm not around Tuesday, if you guys don't hear from me, then you know that that something happened. So we're supposed to get many tornadoes and hail the size of tennis balls. So it's going to be a fun afternoon tomorrow. Like I said, I'll go ahead and premiere them just in case something happens, power goes out or something else, something worse happens. I think that's it. I think that's it from my side.
Do we have any final words from anybody on the panel? Because there might have been a couple of guests that didn't get a word in. I don't know, was there anybody that didn't get a word in, or anybody on the Ballbusters panel that wants to add any final words in respect to hypothesis construction?
We get Nathan, can you unmute some of these guys, or you need me to do it?
Better that you do it.
Let's go to AU person. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Questions, comments, concerns?
Oh no, I'm just here to listen.
Okay, good. Okay. Noel Harry Watson. Questions, comments, concerns? You're lighting up, Noel, but nothing's coming through. Drop out and pop back in again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, we heard you that time.
How you doing, bro?
We heard you. We heard you.
Very good. Oh, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. I don't actually have any questions. I've been a long-time listener. I know Adam. We used to chat a lot at the beginning of the COVID bullshit, and back when I was sort of figuring out the way the world, I can't really say really was, but definitely really wasn't. Yeah, I've been fairly regular listener for the last 18 months or so.
Oh.
You guys, Nathan, etc.
Cool. Thank you.
Tell them where you're shouting out from. No.
I am shouting out a mosquito-ridden little shit spot in the middle of the Mediterranean called Malta. Excuse me. Where, it is currently in some weird kind of lockdown where you can't enter unless you're vaccinated, and I can't exit for that reason, because if I leave, I won't be able to get back and see my kid. So I don't have much better to do than figure out the rest of the world, really.
That leads me to 3 questions I have for you quickly, bro. Just because I know we're right.
So long as they're not about vaccinations. Not
yeah,
about
of course. Nath, I'm not daft. I'm not daft. First one, how's the kid?
She's wonderful. She's great. She's with her mom right now. They all got the lurgy. So they've all been quarantined for the last 2 weeks. I haven't actually seen her in the longest time since she was born. Next question.
How's the cat?
The cat, she is excellent, annoying the crap out of me, chasing me around the house, begging all the time. Third question.
And what is the cat's name today?
Well, I still call her COVID-19 or...
Moving on. Yeah. Just to say, me and Noel did a lot of time on Roxanne's channel, and Noel's cat has a different name each day, unlike his daughter. But yeah, good to hear from you, brother.
And you, fella, and you. I'm going to send you something, Adam, shortly. It's something I've tried to sell Nathan and Quantum Razor a couple of times. I don't think it's really anything they'd particularly be interested in, but when I first saw it, I was like, my God, that's like perfect normie proof that the whole gravity holds everything onto this spinning ball against the forces of an endless vacuum. It's like it just instantly kills that in such a visual way. And the guy who did it didn't mean to do that. He's just a guy playing around with fluorescent bulbs. But I saw it and I was like, that's perfect. And then someone pointed out that, yeah, that's the same thing that happens when you suck on a straw. And I was like, well, that's a really great conversation for a bar, isn't it? I'm going to prove to you that there is no gravity holding water onto the earth and just sucking a drink out of a glass. But yeah, seeing it with the fluorescent tube being cracked into a thing of water was really powerful.
You're gonna need to send me that. Send it over in Skype, bro, and I'll
send you over. I'll pop it on the computer now. All right, mate.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Good to hear from you, brother. Yeah, good to hear from you. Glad you're okay, bro.
Nice to make an introduction as well. Nice to hear you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, I've been following you for a long time. I think I finally subscribed some months back.
Outstanding. Al Junkie, shout out to Al Junkie. This is a good one. Is James Lynn the baller who discovered scurvature?
Well, that's worthy of 10th. That's
yes, really good.
Did we hear from Truth Seeker or Vegan Games?
No, I didn't have any questions right now. But it was something kind of off related to the subject, but I'll just save that for another time.
Okay. Vegan Games. Questions, comments, concerns? Gotcha.
Alrighty.
Yep. Go ahead, Nathan. It's all yours.
Well, that's it. I just wanted to see if the Ballbusters wanted to do a very, very quick plug for their channels. Arwin, if you're listening. If not, we'll move straight on.
No, I'm here. Flat Earth Early Bird show every day. normally 1 p.m. Amsterdam time in the weekdays and 2 p.m. in the weekend. I'm kind of like doing half time for a while, but yeah, still going. Thanks for letting me on the panel again. Didn't really have too much to say except for seeding some conspiracy ideas. But yeah, thanks for the great to hang out.
Leo, Brian, plug your channel.
Well, what about Arwen plugging his channel?
Be Here or Be Sphere for Flat Earth Early Bird on ARWIJN. That's the Arwen channel. Check it out. It's awesome. He says in his enthusiastic way he's doing half time. That means double the concentration of Arwen. Extra goodness. Brian, go ahead.
Something like that.
Yeah, I have a channel on YouTube, Brian's Logic. I have an array of different videos there. There'll be more to come. I kind of do them in spurts, so a bit sporadic. Maybe that's the right word for it, where I'll put out 2 or 3, 4, and then you won't see any for a while. Feeding back there on someone. And yeah, sure, go along and subscribe. Why not? You're subscribed to probably thousands of other channels. Thanks.
You guys are awful.
Go and subscribe. Why not? Unbelievable.
Right, so yeah, indeed, be Here or Be Sphere for Brian's Logic YouTube channel. The best, the only, the most amazing YouTube Flat Earth videos you'll ever encounter. You must subscribe today. Neil, did you want to plug anything?
Oh, hold on a second, Brian. I haven't wrenched you, so you can put your. I don't think I've wrenched you. 1 second. I'm trying to find you in here. Hey, Brian, can you post a message in chat, and then I'll go ahead and wrench you, and that you can post your links in here.
Okay.
I'd encourage people to subscribe to Brian's channel. If you know what I'd say? I'd say do it. Go on. Go on, go on, go on. Would you do it?
Yeah,
Father Ted probably to go over the Americans, but there we go.
No, it's not for them.
just say yo in the YouTube chat. You can move on, Nathan.
Neil, you got anything to say as a supplementary ballbuster?
I was gonna. I was agreeing with you how horrible they are about promoting their own channels. My goodness.
Yeah, you'd probably do a better job of promoting them as an avid fan. I know how much you like Brian's Logic, Neil.
Love Brian's Logic. Ace.
Really,
and I love Neil.
I'm definitely subscribed, and so should you be if you're listening to this conversation.
Brian.
Adam.
You say Adam, I say Brian. Brian, post something in the chat.
I did. I put an hello into the BALLBUSTERS.
Not BALLBUSTERS in the YouTube chat.
Oh, YouTube. Sorry. 1 second.
It's admin. He wants you to be able to post your link. So when we're saying how wonderful you are, and you're like, oh, well, if you fancy subscribing to a channel, there's loads of them, and I'm just one of them. And you could be subscribed to me
if you want.
You could be putting your link in the YouTube chat and those great words of plug to yourself. Right, Adam, what is the world?
Well, yeah, I'm not asked about that. What I'd like to plug, again, is Mitchell's channel, because I was on there last night and did a good chat about CBD oil, particularly, not too much THC based, but particularly on CBD, and I'm going to upload that onto my What Is the World channel. I think on the Adam Making channel as well, because it was a really nice chat with Mitchell. We covered a bit of Sexton at the start, but hopefully went into it and just gave people a little bit of knowledge. I hope it was useful. Disappointed I've not got comment from Quantum Eraser.
No, it was really good.
Carboxylation. Yeah.
Well, I thought Mitchell was going to be here. So because he wasn't here, I forgot, because I did listen to it. I thought it was really good. I thought he did a really great job, you two guys.
Yes, I hope it's out there, and I'd just like to give that a shout, because there's hopefully a lot of good information in there for people for many different reasons. Yeah, so if you go to Mitchell from Australia, Flat Earth School from last night, so that'll be the 22nd of the 10th. Got a big picture of my icon on, my logo on, and also, as I pointed out, Nathan, at the end of the show, Mitchell in his thumbnail put a little picture of an emu and a kiwi, just so I differentiate.
Is that it, Adam?
Yeah, I'm done.
Shout out to another super chat, Al Junkie. He says, shout out to Neil Diamond, that is.
I am a diamond.
That's what he meant. Sure.
A rough cut diamond.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just second that. So Be Here or Be Sphere for Mitchell from Australia is the name of the YouTube channel. And my hat is off to him, because he is a great way of summarizing some of the, or all of the best arguments that we have. And he does it in a very family orientated, friendly way that is definitely not available to people who watch Flat Earth Debate when we're in the thick of it. If you like concise, gentle summaries of absolute all annihilating arguments, then check out Mitchell on Mitchell from Australia. He has got a very, very good channel indeed. And obviously Adam's decided to forego plugging his own channel just to plug Mitchell's, which is great. Have I missed anybody, or shall I shout out the show that's running now? Brian's Logic's channel's going by in the chat if you want to subscribe to him. You can. I mean, it's an option.
If you want.
If you want.
If not, that's good too.
Go on.
There's lots of other channels out there, according to Brian.
Well, people are subscribed to loads of channels they don't even want to be subscribed to, so they might as well be subscribed to mine.
Because it's much better than all those channels, right, Brian?
Yeah, well, I don't know, you see. I can't make that claim, because there could be some really handy channels at that.
I think you're right, Brian. It'd be wholly incorrect to presuppose that.
Right.
Exactly.
When you're on YouTube, it is understood that you will embrace a certain degree of narcissism in this regard. It's just expected. It doesn't make you a narc. Everyone's got on the scale. They're somewhere on the narcissism scale. You've got to embrace it. You've got to say, no, my channel, that would be Nathan Oakley 1980, is the best. And you should definitely be subscribed, because you are missing out already for not being subscribed. How dare you? Subscribe today to Nathan Oakley 1980 and Nathan Oakley, respectively, especially as Nathan Oakley channel's currently got a show going out and it's brand spanking new. I mean, you haven't seen it because it's brand new, right? It's definitely better than all the other crap that you subscribe to. God, why are you subscribed to?
Nathan,
So that's how you promote a channel.
Well, that's advertising, isn't it, Nate? Yeah. So if that's advertising, are you prepared to go as far as to say that the Nathan Oakley channel is scientifically proven the best YouTube channel out there?
Yeah.
It's been experimentally validated as the best YouTube channel out there.
Science don't prove things.
Like you'd know.
9 out of 10 cats said their owners preferred Nathan Oakley 1980.
I can't even say I won the science bee.
Well,
yeah. Oh, Ryan, go on.
Yeah, well, look, okay. I'm not the same YouTuber as Nathan normally, but I'm not going to let that hold me back. It's like this. If I end up going down in history, your grandkids could tell the story that their grandfather or grandmother used to interact with Brian's Logic all the time on YouTube. So if you don't subscribe then your grandkids may not ever get to tell that story, if that story ever actually happened.
That was not bad. You need to put a bit more spin on it. Your grandchildren will be amongst those who aren't talking about the Brian's Logic channel. Do you want that for your grandchildren? No. Definitely, you should be subscribed to Brian's Logic. That's me, contextually you. Anyway, I think that's going to be the last word on this. So yeah, be here or be sphere for brand spanking new Flat Earth Debate Uncut and After Show. In all seriousness, you should be subscribed to me if you're not already. And that's going out on my second channel, which is Nathan Oakley right now. I'm going to say a huge, massive, enormous thank you first and foremost to all of you smash the super chat in Quantum Erasers YouTube channel or in my channel if this is going out as a repeat next week, which it will be. So thank you if you've subscribed or smashed the super chat on my channel. Obviously, a massive thank you to all of you tuned in live, and a massive thank you to the public participants who joined in this brief part of the participation part of Ballbusters. And again, a massive thank you to all of the Ballbusters themselves for making this live show possible. I've been Nathan Oakley. Be sphere or be here on the Nathan Oakley channel for the current Uncut and After Show that's going out. And we will see you all in the next Ballbusters.